All right, folks, we're in tune to the online dinner party. And of course, we're going to have a couple of clues to give you later on during the show as to who our mystery guest will be. And as y'all know, that is usually just somebody that is a celebrity or something that I have dug up from the past or dug up from the present. So that'll definitely be our mystery guest that will appear later on. One will be from the field of education. So you'll see some clues going across the banners and everything, talking about who that might be. And another one will be from the country of India, a celebrity from the country of India. Try to get one national person and one international person. And I did this one this time just for one of my senior producers, none other than Ankit, who is from India. So I gave him an Indian celebrity since I had not done that yet. And so far, folks have not been doing that well on guessing who the folks will be and who will be engaged in our mystery guest contest. So we've got some great guests that are going to be talking about education, and education has become a very important topic around the country, and a lot is going on in that regard. As a matter of fact, right here in the Triangle, they are having some schools that are just now starting to open up. Matter of fact, Wake County elementary and middle school students will start returning for in-person classes over the next 2 months, but high school students will stay with online classes into January. So the Wake County School Board unanimously approved that yesterday, a reopening plan that has pre-K through 3 students and K through 12 special education students in regional programs returning for in-person instruction on October 26th. And by the way, that's my brother's birthday, and he's got my 2 nephews. So I'm wondering how he's feeling about that happening, even though that has not been announced here in Durham. So we'll find out whether that actually exists in Durham as well, even though I know a number of other schools in our region are also looking at the ways to get back into the school cycle and to not just do remote classes, but also do in-person classes. Like I said, there will be a cycle of 1 week of in-person classes and 2 weeks of remote classes before switching to daily in-person classes on November 16th. At least that's what they're doing in Wake County. I know Chapel Hill and the Orange County area has also voted to do some similar kind of things with a mix of in-person and online classes. But I'm so glad to have with me some great guests, and I'm going to bring in the person that helped me put together this incredible panel of folks that will talk about education and how things are going. So with that being said, I'm going to bring Nancy Sulla into the conversation and say, hello, Nancy. How are you doing? How are things going? It's glad to have you here. And as I was just talking about, here in this area, we've been seeing our schools that are starting to go into the in-person route as they're trying to get more folks going, because they say that our COVID cases are going down, so they're feeling that they want to come back into the school system. So I know that you've definitely been a proponent of the hybrid mix of things because of all that's going on in the world. So I'd like to hear some of your reflections on what's going on. I know that you're in the New Jersey, New York area. Like I've told our listeners, I'm here in North Carolina, but I'd like to just hear some of your reflections, because we're seeing more and more states that are starting this reopening kind of campaign.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Mark. It's great to be here. And actually, my company, my consulting company, IDE Corp, is headquartered in New Jersey, but I'm personally in Florida because that's where I live. So we've got it triangulated. We've got some people here from Florida, from New Jersey, from New York, out to Texas. And what I do for a living is help redesign instruction in classrooms. And prior to the pandemic, I focused on a framework that I created called the Learner Active Technology Infused Classroom. And it's all about, or we call it LATIC, and it's all about putting kids in charge of their own learning. I've written books called Students Taking Charge. But once COVID hit and the schools closed abruptly, it was just like overnight, we realized we had to help teachers get up to speed on what remote learning could look like. So we started just running PD sessions for teachers everywhere. And I ran webinars for parents on what home-based learning looks like. And then over the summer, we kind of reinvented ourselves again to really talk about this issue of hybridity. But I don't mean hybrid in terms of some kids are in school and some are at home. That's a hybrid attendance model, and that is accurate. But what I'm looking for is, since we don't know, and we knew in the summer a lot of teachers were concerned, like, well, we don't know how school's going to start. And my point is, it doesn't matter, because you're going to develop a set of structures and strategies that will work as well at home as they do in school, so that if your students are at home, it's fine. If they're in school, it's fine. And if you've got a mix of half home and half school, it's fine. And that really came out of, Mark, in the spring. All of the teachers that had been designing Laddie classrooms with us reported that when schools closed and the kids went home, they just kept going. They had problem-based tasks, they had activity lists, they scheduled their own time. And we realized that the framework actually was perfect for this situation. So that's where we're rolling now, is helping teachers and administrators figure out, how do you teach no matter where the kids are? How do you create? That's my new book is about learning anywhere, anytime. And that's how I'm rolling these days.
It sounds like a great way to roll. Sounds like you're doing some amazing things in that regards. I know I was talking to a friend of mine, and they were actually talking about how they're trying to be a parent and do the remote learning, and they're still trying to adjust because, as they put it to me, they were having the conversations when they said that they looked over there and they have a young child, and the young child wasn't in front of the classroom. They were having to put them back into the classroom setting because they were sitting there going like, I know that, and I don't remember whether it was a boy or girl, but know that they were supposed to be learning. And unfortunately, when they looked over there to the side, they were deciding to play video games or do something else. So they had to put them back into the context of the learning environment.
That's another book I've written on executive function. And that's really important for all of the younger students who may not have all of those skills of persisting in a task and focusing. And that's where, yes, parents are critical to kind of point them back in the right direction.
Yeah, because I know I've actually done that, and you don't know this, Nancy, but I've done some work in the testing field, and I know that I brought this up with Sri and everything, but I work with a company called Measurement Incorporated, which is one of the leading testing companies in the country, actually. But I know that even as testers, we've been concerned because we've been trying to figure out, are they even going to do the testing? I know that they sent us home last March, and since that time, those of us that were grading the test have been sitting home kind of twiddling our thumbs, waiting to see if testing was going to take place in 2021. And I know that you've got some guests that will come on that are involved in that field and everything. But what has been your perception of how education is coming online or coming back online? Because as I said, even as a person that does online testing and does that end of the year testing, a number of us are even trying to figure out if it's going to happen. But we know it's not happening the rest of this year. So we're trying to figure out if it's going to happen in 2021.
Yeah, it's. I know I'll make a lot of educators unhappy, but I hope we get back to testing because I'm a big fan of formative assessment, which obviously teachers need to be testing all the time to see where kids are at, how they're progressing, et cetera. But even standardized testing, a lot of people say, oh, standardized tests are bad and we need to get rid of them so we can get back to schooling. I actually feel that assessment is a huge part of the learning process, and that the act of taking tests and the act of demonstrating what you know is really important. Because think about it, beyond school in life, when you go for a job interview, you have to be able to submit a great resume. You have to be able to be on an interview. You need to be able to demonstrate what you know. So the idea that we shouldn't focus on that in school has always bothered me. I think that we do need standardized tests. Obviously, there's a whole equity concern. We have to make sure that the tests, and I'm sure you deal with this all the time in designing, Mark, but making sure that they are culturally appropriate, that all students can succeed at demonstrating their knowledge. But I think that those tests are important for us to see, and probably less about how a student is doing and more about how the educational system is doing. When I run that, I think it was, I think it was the Dufours, Rick Dufour, who had said, made the comment that, what is it? A physical is to formative assessment as an autopsy is to summative assessment. That while students are learning, it's kind of like taking a physical, and that you see what your data is, and based on that data, you can change what you're doing in your teaching. But the summative assessments, the state tests that come at the end, the standardized tests, that's kind of like an autopsy because the kid's moving on, like they're gone. Nothing else I can do to help that student. However, as we know, autopsies in general shed tremendous light on the medical industry and science. And I think it's the same thing with, we should be looking at those tests to see how.
Yeah. Let's see. Nancy is apparently.
Did we just have one of those blips?
Yeah, we were having one of those kind of like moments where you're talking about testing, and I didn't catch the last sentence that you said because we were having one of those little moments and everything.
Well, I had said that the summative assessments, the state tests that you're working with, we need those because they tell us how the system is doing. How is the school doing? How is the curriculum? How's the teacher? Because that should be really measuring the school, not the student, because there's nothing more that we can do for it. Well, obviously, we take that test to the next grade level. So we use it in a way to target skills the student needs. But I definitely think it would be a mistake for us to think that. And actually now, of course, I'm a fan of saying, I think it's a mistake to say that schooling can't go on in this environment, or we shouldn't take the tests, or we shouldn't. It's like there is a way to teach that allows you to have things working as well at home as they are in school, and you set the kids up. And yes, there are definitely hurdles and challenges to get through, but I think we need to look at a new normal, because I don't know about you, Mark, but I really don't think we're heading back to school, in full for too long, for too soon. And if we do, I mean, look, they just had to postpone the Steelers-Titans game because of COVID. It's like we no sooner get football back, and there it goes.
Yep, you're right. They had to postpone that really quickly and everything. We've got some other amazing guests that you've had the pleasure of bringing to me and everything. So I want to bring them on as well. And if you'll introduce them to our listening audience, I would love that. So I'm going to bring on Adele first. So Adele is coming on, as well as Shane. And also we've got Flo in the conversation as well. So if you can introduce me to these amazing folks, I would love to know about these amazing folks that you have brought to IBM.TV and the online dinner party. So I'd love to know about these amazing ladies and everything. And of course, I'd love to know why they all got into the education field. I'll let you introduce them. I'd love to know about their background. So we'll go one at a time. But Nancy, introduce them first.
All right. So Mark, first, we all want to collectively thank you for hosting this online dinner party for us. It's a wonderful thing. I'll do it in the order on my screen that I see you guys. So Adele McCullough, let's see, we collected each other a long time ago, right? I want to say, too many years to talk about, and started working together when Adele was the associate superintendent in Jersey City Schools, which is a large urban school district in New Jersey. And then, she decided at some point she should retire, but it's never quite worked out for her, because since then she's been working at the college level, preparing principals, preparing superintendents for their roles. And we'll get to hear more from her, including the George Street Playhouse, which I'm very intrigued by. So we'll come back to you in a second, Adele. And then Shanae, I collected about, 6 years ago, when I was looking to add a fabulous, 5 years ago, I was looking to add a fabulous member to my team. Shanae was at the time living in South Carolina, but we transported her over to Florida, and she's our director of educational equity, currently living in Florida. And then we have Flo Hannes, and Flo I collected a whole bunch of years ago as well, right? Like, what are we up to now? 30? How old are your nieces? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, you're muted.
28.
So we've known each other for 29 years, and Flo has been. She has so many titles I can't remember them all. But she is essentially, when I asked her, to be a part of the dinner party, and she said, "What are you looking for from me?" I said, "Well, I need the world's guru on occupational therapy." So here you are. She has been a college chair. She is currently the president of the New York State Occupational Therapy Association. She's professor emeritus, or one of those other fancy titles they give her. So what we've got here is we've got OT, we've got equity, and we've got Adele. So Adele, you're first.
Yes, Adele, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in education, and a little bit about your own background and everything along those lines.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm just enthralled with the title of your show as an online dinner party. I think it's really, really a cool way to think about this. So the story is a long story in the sense that I keep telling people I'm old. So there's a lot of pieces to the story. But I started out as a teacher at the beginning of my career, having always thought I was going to just be a teacher. I did start to teach in the Jersey City public schools. I then graduated through the ranks. I became a district supervisor and a few other positions, and then ultimately wound up as the associate superintendent for curriculum and instruction from K to 12. So to just tell you a little bit about Jersey City, it's New Jersey's second largest school district. We had 30,000 plus kids, 46 schools. And we've always known this to be true, but for 2020, Jersey City is known or has been recognized as the most diverse city in the country. So, language groups, about 75 to 80 different language groups. And it's a burgeoning city on the other side of the Manhattan skyline. And so all of those skyscrapers that you only saw once on the New York side, now you can see not as many, but equally impressive skyscrapers on the New Jersey side. So that's how I met Nancy. One of my positions along the way was the district supervisor of what we called programs that maximize potential. So I think in my career, that was my favorite job, my best job title, because you could create it into anything you wanted it to be. Technically, it was the supervisor of gifted and talented programs. But if you get to know about education a little bit, for most gifted and talented programs, students have to prove themselves in order to get into a gifted and talented program. So way back in 1989-ish, 87, 88, when we redefined what it looked like, it was based on an equity model that given the opportunity for students to be in a gifted setting, the expectations and the kind of options for students would help students rise to new heights. So, and if a parent wished a child to be in one of those classes, we let them in as long as they were committed to doing the work. So that started a pathway of just re-envisioning what had been many traditional kinds of strands or pathways for kids. One other interesting fact about Jersey City was that it was the first state-operated district in the nation. So we were the poster child for being taken over from the state level with state appointed superintendents, et cetera, et cetera. So in those years, everything that occurred in the district, I want to say, occurred for the benefit of the students. There were substantive changes in terms of materials in classrooms, new buildings being built. So even though the state thought they would be there for 6 months, they wound up being there for 30 years. They just exited, believe it or not, with a transition plan probably in 2019. So through the years, we've learned to live with lots of oversight, but lots of transparency. So as the associate superintendent, I was there 11 years. And again, one day, one of the state officials asked us as educators, so how many kids in your district are reading at the 3rd grade level? And we all kind of looked around the table and said, we think we have a good idea, but we're really not certain. So again, it was another one of these defining moments that if students aren't reading on grade level by the end of 3rd grade, the ability to catch up as you go up the grades, kids get turned off. It's almost insurmountable for kids to catch up. So we first learned a few things. One, you needed to teach reading at every grade level. Most districts, right? Reading was the realm of 1st and 2nd grade teachers, not 4th, 5th, and 6th grade teachers. So we try to transform all of our teachers into teachers of literacy, as well as the repertoires they already had. We also knew we needed some experts to come in and help us, not just look at our curriculum, but to provide support for teachers in hundreds of classrooms to give them the confidence, the knowledge, the skills, and also support them in their endeavors through professional development. And that's how Nancy came to Jersey City and was embedded with her consultants in our classrooms, along with we had another group of consultants for language arts literacy excellence. And then we had a different group of coaches and consultants for math. And within the years between, I want to say 2001, 2005, we substantially reduced the achievement gap for all groups at all grade levels in language arts and math. So in 2006, and this sounds like ancient history, but it really was an accomplishment. The Broad Foundation for Urban Education, New Jersey City was one of the 5 national finalists for that award for having reduced the achievement gap substantially. So we were proud of that. So when we talk about kids,
you're really dating us here by keeping those numbers, okay?
I know. But again, you know what? It sets why I say all of that is, though, again, I was fortunate enough when I became the associate superintendent to have inherited a department that was run by two former assistant superintendents. So it gave me the opportunity to continue. Continuity is important and take things to the next level. So in many districts nationwide, not just in New Jersey, there's this transition every year or two. There's a new superintendent, there's a new assistant superintendent, and they have new ideas. And so they kind of throw out some of the old stuff and they start from the beginning. So having really a period of extensive time where there was continuity, it gave us the opportunity to build on that. So again, I was there for a number of years after that, and we did continue with that work. Much of it continues today. I've been out of the district now about 10 years, but again, I know, I told you I was old.
You're just like, we've been redesigning schools forever. Good freaking vibe to you.
We've made great progress. And as Nancy said, we've affected many students' lives and many adult teacher lives. So since then, I then have been working at, it's called the New Jersey Excel program. Mm-hmm. It's the only state-approved non-traditional principal certification program. So it's not like college courses where you have semesters and exams and white papers that you write. It's a 12 to an 18-month program where people who are aspiring teachers who want to be principals or supervisors and receive that certification participate in a spiraling curriculum. It's about 106 classes, 30 different modules over that time, a lot of in-field coaching, mentoring, projects, things like that. So that work really was exciting and is exciting. I'm still there. And, even though people say people don't want to rise to the level of school administrators these days, we always have a really robust cohort of individuals who come in twice a year. So coupled with that, I decided then I wanted to go see the other side. So I went to higher ed to see what a traditional administrator certification program looks like. So I'm doing both of those things simultaneously. So it gives me a good view on both sides. So coupled with that, my most recent piece adding to this whole perspective is I'm a board member for a local theater called George Street Playhouse in New Jersey. It's located in New Brunswick, which is another one of our urban centers. Mm-hmm. And they have contractual agreements for residencies in a number of urban school districts, and they offer programming. So as I and we have kind of always been based in equity and diversity and knowing what programs need to look like, I've been helping them redesign their educational theater arts programming for the community and for the school districts that they service. So that's really exciting and interesting work. But again, as Nancy was saying, good practice works anywhere, for theater art strategies and those kinds of classrooms in graduate level courses for adult learners. So when we talk about, the learner active technology infused classroom, again, given this COVID situation, that's all what we're dealing with. And we've moved from just this direct instruction delivery model where people put up PowerPoints and talk over them to now what does real learning look like online. So it's been a quick transition. The COVID situation forced us to do things with urgency. But I, like Nancy would say, we're not going back to where we were before this situation. Education will be forever different, and we need to take advantage of the opportunities that it's bringing to us.
Speaking of it being different, Adele, and then I want to get to our other guests as well. But speaking of it being different, I've actually am on the board of the Carolina Theater, and we've actually got a very rich theater program where we have the schools usually would come to the theater and watch the theater productions, but now we're going more virtual. So I know my friend Noel has got folks that are coming in watching the performances virtually. So how are y'all doing that with your Playhouse? Are y'all doing more of a virtual kind of thing, or how are y'all managing to do the theater work?
Yeah, they ran some academy programs that they call academy programs. They're like summer mini courses, and then they do it in the winter and the spring. Those things had to pivot immediately to a virtual environment. So again, we've been looking at digital media strategies and how you take this Zoom box and transform it into something that's artistically rich and engaging, but the programs have become virtual. So right now, for the school performances, it's not a theater where they just put on performances that kids came to. They design custom residencies with teachers in the school level grades connected to their curriculum. But again, they're doing that in the process right now of recreating those in-person situations virtually. So this summer, there was a summer institute to provide teachers with skills and strategies on how to use this digital media environment to engage students in a different way, to prepare them for the work that they're doing this fall. So it's been moving, and we're getting there, but like everybody else, we're still exploring what it really means.
And before we get to the other guests and everything, the other question I was curious about, and I'd love to hear from both Nancy and Adele about this, is I've always been a big fan of critical thinking, and I sometimes think that we don't do enough of that training in our education system. So I was wondering if y'all are seeing enough critical thinking actually being taught in the academic setting, or is that something that we've gotten away from and need to get back to? So I was wondering what y'all's thoughts are on that.
I'll reiterate what Nancy said about the state assessments. In New Jersey, several years ago, the nature of the state assessments at every grade level changed based on new educational standards, right? The standards focused more on critical thinking, application of knowledge. So, for instance, a lot of the shift had to do with now students reading more nonfiction, being able to address, reality, finding facts in writing, nonfiction-based writing, and things like that. So again, I think through the state testing expectations as well, I shouldn't say the test, because the tests are aligned to the standards. So the expectation of the standards that get measured through the test changed teaching over the last few years in New Jersey. I think there's much more critical thinking, problem solving, real world challenge applications based scenarios going on in classrooms. Teachers have shifted to deeper language arts teaching, science teaching, because of the standards and the way curriculum. Now, I can't say that's even throughout, but in New Jersey, at least, again, all of these polls come out, and New Jersey is still number one or number two always in, the impact of education. So obviously, it's pretty widespread in New Jersey. Teachers complained, administrators complained when these newly design tests came out. Same way, I'll give you one more example. This is my favorite story. The complaint, Nancy would know, was that the new tests were going to be given on computer, no longer paper-based tests. People came kicking and screaming to say, you mean I have to buy 150 computers to take the state tests? And I'd say, no, you're buying the 150 computers so that your kids can use them every day and learn how to learn using the computer, and you're also going to take the state assessments on them. So putting that device in kids' hands, unless you change the way you're teaching and what you're doing with it, doesn't make a difference. But why I say that is that decision several years ago had really impacted the number of technologies that were in schools and in classrooms. New Jersey and every place else probably, but New Jersey particularly would have been in a very different place if we were still doing paper-based state assessments. There would have been no computers for kids to take home during this COVID. There wouldn't have been as deep computer technology learning going on across classrooms. So again, every child may not have a one-to-one computer in the state of New Jersey, but we were much more positioned for this COVID situation, given what came a few years before.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that one of the things that, and forgive me if I mispronounce it, is it pronounced Shane or Shanae, or how is it actually pronounced?
Shanae. It's Shanae.
Shanae, I know that one of the things you're involved in is around diversity and inclusion and things of that nature. So I'd love to hear some of your reflections on that, and also how you got into teaching. Because I know one of the things I'm always hearing about is that when we think about like the African American community, there is a number of us that have gone into the teaching field, but usually it's the ladies that go into the teaching field. And I know there's been a push to have more black males in the teaching profession. So I was wondering if you could talk about some of the pushes around diversity and some of your own work.
Sure. I've always wanted to be a teacher. So this being an educator was something I always wanted to do. My Aunt Gail she's still teaching now. She teaches kindergarten, first grade. And so when I was in high school, I was like, this is what I want to do. When I was in middle school, I was putting on little camps. My brother couldn't attest to at my grandparents' house. I was teaching him my little cousin's lessons. So being an educator has always been something that I've been very passionate about. And so after I graduated from Florida State, I went and taught actually in Charlotte, North Carolina. I taught in Charlotte for 2 years before I did the next 7 in Columbia, South Carolina, where all my family is from. And I always taught in Title I schools. Charlotte, I taught like in the city of Charlotte, so not in the burbs around. And so I was just very passionate about education. And I taught math to middle schoolers, which in the South, I always get, oh, bless your heart. And if you're from the South, you know what that means. And so teaching middle school at that age, teaching math, that content, but it was always my love. And probably my last couple of years teaching, we shifted into going one-to-one. And to Adele's point, that started to shift how we were thinking about teaching. Because I was in a cohort, I was called voluntold into a particular cohort that you're going to do blended learning, me and 3 of my other math friends in South Carolina. But you can't, giving kids one-to-one Chromebooks at the time, you can't just go back to I'm teaching math in front of the board and kids have a computer, or they just bring the computer around from class to class and use it to type or to just submit something. And so you really had to rethink, what does instruction look like? What are the different strategies I now need to employ? And I share with teachers all the time, I always felt more confident sitting in a small group talking to kids and seeing what they learned. I share this story often of I'm on the board teaching about absolute value, and a girl raised her hand talking about, what are those lines? And I was like, if she's asking about the lines, and I've done solved the whole question, did some real good teaching, I felt like, and you're asking me what the lines are, you've missed it all. I was like, so whole group I'm not about to do that anymore. Because there's other kids who are like solving 3 questions down the line. You're worried about, you don't even know if it's a 6 or a B, like those sorts of things. I was like, all right, we're gonna try something else. So my last couple of years teaching, that was really the shift in my mindset in how are we creating a whole bunch of different screencasts. We got really good at that, and instructional activities for kids, so that I could really sit one-on-one, 1-to-2 with students, so that they could, I could see that they had an understanding of mastery, which is so important now in this setting as well, of being very intentional about, I need to know what all my students know. And in COVID and having all of our kids basically a little picture frame like this, and being able to have that one-on-one and that connection with kids, which is so important. I got out of teaching, and to Adele's point too, I was like, the admin task is not really for me. I never saw myself as being an administrator. It was teaching, and then whatever that something else was. And so I saw IDE and Nancy, and they're very much aligned to what I was already doing in my classroom. So I took a risk. I moved here to Tampa, a place that I have not ever lived. Even though I lived in Florida, but I lived on the East Coast, the Broward, Fort Lauderdale side, so this was all new. But, when things happen and come together, they always come together for a purpose. And so 5 years later, I'm still here. Nancy has stuck with me for a long, long time, for a long, long time now, so that I will have soon enough these conversations like Flo and Adele, that we've known each other for all this time.
Yeah, we'll get by 5.
Yeah.
And why don't you talk about the book that we're writing?
Yes. And so equity is a huge piece and passion for me. I have always taught Black and Brown students. I think it's important that I did that. So representation is super important for me. I probably had 2 or 3 Black educators that I can count off the top of my head. One was a male, because they are rare, as you said, Mark. Even though, like, luckily in the school that I taught in, we had a good few that are still there now, and that's important for kids to see themselves reflected in different ways. And so I talk about that with teachers. We talk about that in part of actually a blog post that I wrote probably about a month ago about this representation, and especially in this virtual setting, like, how are kids feeling connected? That's a big piece with that social emotional connection. How are they feeling represented? How are we making sure that every kid is seen and heard? Because in this environment, it's so much more important that we have to be very purposeful about reaching out, making those connections between home and school, because, we all gone through some trauma this year. It looks different. Home life is different. What your setup is different. What you have access to is different. So how are we making sure that kids aren't slipping through the cracks? It was easier when you could put your eyes on all your kids all the time. Mm-hmm. Or if they were absent that day, you could readily go and be like, ooh, a kid was absent, I need to make sure. But here there's a lot of, things happening, tech issues and all of this. So being very purposeful as teachers and educators, as we're working with teachers, of how are you reaching out? How are you making sure that you are connecting eye to eye with as many kids as you can? Like, talking to a Zoom of 30 kids is not going to connect you to your 30 students. I need to get in a little breakout room and look at 2 of y'all in a bigger screen, and that's a little baby postage stamp, so that I can make sure I see, that you understand, or that you also feel connected to me, the things that you're reading, whatever my learning environment is. So all of those things are super important that they don't get lost. And so what's interesting is I'm taking a class, I'm getting my doctorate degree from Florida State at the moment, and I'm taking a class about online pedagogy. We've been having a lot of conversations about, like, the focus shifted to so much like, oh, I got to make sure the kids I got to teach the instruction. But it's like, but what are the kids learning? Like, we need to, yes, the instruction is important, but it's not important if the kids aren't actually learning. So what is the learner experience? How are the kids learning the material? Not so much how are you making sure that you're saying all the words and getting all the stuff out that you have to do, but how are the kids actually, how is it being received? And so those have been a lot of the different conversations that we've had, that we've been working through as we're working with teachers. And even as I'm still very much connected to my teacher base in South Carolina as well, of the things that we've even talked about, of what does classrooms look like. We've needed this change about 20 some years ago. The pandemic just forced our hand, frankly. Like, we didn't need the COVID to come and change education and shift it. But if that's what, we're not going back. And so how do we kind of move forward from here is that true point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like we're not going back at all. Y'all are so right about that. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to get back flow and everything. Looked like she was having some technical difficulties, but hopefully she'll come back on. But one of the things that I have to say is that I've actually had teachers a long time in my life and everything. My mother was a guidance counselor, so that's what she did in terms of her profession. And then she went into more media and entrepreneurship work, and now she's retired. But her initial job out of college was as a guidance counselor, and all of her sisters were involved in some form or another of education. I know that I've got one that is a retired librarian, a medical librarian, and that's a form of education to me. And then I've got one that's a teacher, still doing teaching in the school system when she feels like it, because she's also raising kids and grandkids and things of that nature. So she's involved. And then my Aunt Carolyn, who has unfortunately passed away, was also involved in both as a teacher and as an administrator. But she was actually a principal in New Jersey. She was a principal around the Sparta, New Jersey area and all of that. So she definitely got that strong teaching background. And I know my brother has done work in the education field as well. So it's definitely something that's very important to my family and all of that. I do have to share a story with y'all of what I consider one of the worst education experiences I've ever had and everything. And that was when I was in high school, and I was taking a physics class. And I do not claim to be the most mathematical person or the most scientific person in the world, but I was taking a mathematics class, and there was a young lady from another country that was teaching the course, and she was probably doing it as like a work study kind of situation would be my guess. But she was teaching and she was giving us this long puzzle and this long complicated thing and everything. And she said the worst thing that in my mind a teacher can tell us. So as I remember this, and I'm 58 now, so I remember this, and I was like probably 14 or 15 at the time. But she sat there, she gave us all of this long, complicated puzzle or formula and everything. And in the middle of it, she turned around to us, and in one of the thickest accents I've ever heard, because she was of Laotian or Laotian descent and everything, she told us that she had no idea whether it was right or not. And we're sitting there going like, wait a minute, you are the teacher. If you don't know, who does know? Because you're supposed to be teaching us. So like I said, that was to me one of the worst experiences as a student, because I'm sitting there going like, I want to know that you know what you're doing if you're going to be teaching me. And that was me as the teenage me and everything. But just wanted to know y'all's reflections of times that y'all have seen teachers not necessarily doing it the correct way. So I'm sure that in all your work, you've had those experiences.
For sure. And as a teacher even, and I taught middle schoolers, so, but I feel like it's part of what I was very clear about if I made a mistake. And they're like, well, we thought you were wrong, but I didn't want to, please say something, because I don't want y'all to, back to your point about critical thinking, I don't want y'all to just blindly, like little baby sheep, just write everything down and say, oh, she's right because she's up here. I was like, sometimes my mind just be gone. So, it went somewhere. So I need y'all to like speak up. It's okay. And so that whole, especially in seventh grade, they're like, oh, should I say, should I not say? I'm helping you develop that, like, you know what? I'm not going to just trust everything. You said before that it means this, this, and this. Is that still true? Like asking those questions. And so having them, I talk to teachers a lot about making your thinking visible. Like if I'm walking through a math problem, like, I wonder what step I should take next here. What makes the most sense? Because those are the skills that's going to help kids when they have to go back and do stuff themselves. They'll be like, what should I do next here? What makes the most sense? Because in teaching them, I'm also guiding them to be their own thinkers, which frankly we need, as they leave school, they're going to be citizens longer than they're going to be in school. So how are we, preparing them for that next phase? They're only with us for 13 years, in that K-12 system. Then they're going to be citizens. So,
and how do we make them efficacious citizens? Because I always say there's two kinds of people in this world. There's people to whom life happens, and there are people who make life happen. And, I think efficacy and the ability to instill in a young person that they can really make life happen, they can set goals and achieve them. To me, that's what it's all about. And it does go back to the question you asked earlier about, Mark, about the critical thinking, and ties into what everyone here is saying. I'm a big fan of problem-based learning and giving kids real-world problems to solve. Yeah. And particularly in this time, it motivates them. So students are either engaged or compliant or behavior problems or dropped out. Like those are the four choices. And so we need kids to be engaged, because even compliant isn't enough, because it doesn't get information, up here to stick around for a while. So we've talked to teachers who have said, well, how do I get the kids to join my Zoom session? And I'm like, well, be interesting, first of all, engage the kids in solving problems, give them a pathway to get there, like by showing them a rubric of what it would take to advocate for your solution. Let the kids at it, give them an activity list of a variety of learning activities along different cognitive levels and learning styles, and let the kids take charge of their own learning and let them use you as a resource. They'll meet with you plenty once they know you are, once they need you. Everything in my work comes down to felt need. Once they need you, they'll be showing up for your Zoom sessions. And we had some kids once in New York. They had a snowstorm coming. We knew schools were going to be closed. And the students said to their teachers, this was in middle school, they said, well, are you going to be online tomorrow? Because we're going to be working on our problem and we're all going to connect. We just want to know if you're going to be available for us. So these are kids who on a snow day are not jumping up and down saying, yay, we don't have school. They're looking at each other going, oh, it's a snow day. Like, how are we going to get together? All right, we'll get together online. What time should we meet? Let's see if the teacher's available. That's what you want. And even I always frown when I see around April and May, people start tweeting, oh, the school year is almost over. How will we keep kids engaged through the rest of the school year? And we look at the classrooms we design, and on the last day of school, the kids are saying, what? We're done? We have to finish this? Because you want kids to be so engaged. I met with this one class. It was about, I guess it was third graders who had just designed a solution to a problem, and they were going to advocate for their solution with me. And so they're talking all about it. They did a great job. And at the end, I said, so it's the day before spring vacation, isn't it? And they're all nodding their heads. And I'm like, how many of you, instead of taking a spring break, would rather be in school all next week to keep working on these problems? And all the kids raised their hand. And the teacher was like, thanks.
Yeah, because that actually raises an interesting point that I just thought about it, everything. Because I know that a very popular thing that happens in schools is school voting. It's that kids voting kind of thing and everything. And of course, every kid participates. But unfortunately, we don't see that happening in the national scene and everything of that nature. So I wish we could carry some of that knowledge we learned from our kids and the kid programs into like the way that we treat the whole entire nation and everything. Because I just think that kids voting, and I don't even remember when that started, but it's always been something that is always enthralled and it actually engaged the kids. And I'm trying to figure out where that disconnect is between the time that the kids are so much involved in wanting to study about politics and about social justice and things of that nature to the times that they get out into the adult world and it becomes less important to them. So I wonder if our teachers have any theories as to where that disconnect is and how we can get that disconnect away from people. We can draw them back into wanting to be engaged, because I've always found that a number, as you just said, Nancy, a number of our kids are engaged in a number of things when they're children, but then unfortunately they're not. Just as an example, I was taught a long time ago by some friends of mine that they say don't engage kids at a very young age because they're afraid that they won't understand what's going on. My dad thoroughly threw that theory out the woods and everything, because when he came in and everything, when my nephews were born, like I said, they're 11 and 12 now, but when they were born, he was going out there because he's got a science background. So he was showing them trees, he was showing them different other kinds of things, and it was actually engaging them. Now, I have some friends of mine that were like, I don't know why he did that, because they were little kids and it wasn't going into their brains. It wasn't development, but Dad didn't want to buy into that theory. He actually thought that they should be engaged at an early age, and I think that they're some of the brightest young men that I know. So like I said, of course, I'm biased. I'm an uncle, and I'm an uncle, so I'm biased.
I say the same about my 4-year-old niece, Mia. She takes a lot of kids take in a lot of information, whether you want them to or not. So they're watching, kids learn how to speak by those in which they are around. So you are the company you keep. And so kids, they pick up a lot of things. She's 4. And so when I speak to her like an adult child. So not, using full sentences. I have her make sure she responds to me back in full sentences, explaining what something is. She asks a lot of questions. I answer. We talk when we go for walks and stuff. That's super important, because that's how they get those critical thinking skills. Kids ask questions. They inquire. They come into school naturally being inquisitive. And so isn't it Sir Ken Robinson, Nancy, that talks about how that creativity, because school then takes all of that and puts it into a box of it. Whereas
recently we saw a graph. I was thinking about it. I don't know where we saw it, that showed the number of questions that young children ask. And it's this huge number of questions until age 6.
Yeah.
When they go to school.
Because they know how now to frame the question that has to be right or wrong versus I'm just asking a question because I want to know. So that
I was in the classroom. I was in a classroom years ago when it was a kindergarten classroom, and the teacher has all the kids gathered around, and she's saying, and today we're going to learn about dinosaurs. And this little boy is like, oh. And so she calls on him, and he says, I saw a whale once. Well, now I'm sitting there thinking, love this kid, because he's made the connection very large, unusual, blah, blah, blah. And the lovely kindergarten teacher said, as kindergarten teachers are lovely and they care about their kids, she said, "That's nice." I don't remember what the boy's name was, Johnny. "That's nice, Johnny. But today we're going to learn about dinosaurs." So in the nicest of ways, Johnny was told, "Nope, stop asking questions, just follow along." And we teach students how to be compliant, in preschool. And we've got to think differently about that, because when you talk about the whole voting and why aren't young people more engaged, let's say, in civic duties? I don't know when it was, and Adele, you might remember, but 100 million years ago when we were young, somewhere along the line, the kind of state tests that rolled out across all the states were testing ELA and math. That was it. And then someplace along the line, the scientists got involved and said, we can't leave science out. So now we test ELA, science, and math. Those are like the main state tests. And then in some places, they'll throw in social studies, but pretty much we pushed social studies out as though it doesn't count. And I think that the real problem with that is that people don't understand government. I mean, it is a very different animal, government. It is a unique organization. And normally you would learn all about it in school. But now I feel like we've got to do all this ELA. I've had districts say,
it.
Right. Well, I have schools that say, our math scores are bad. So what are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to double up and give them 2 math classes a day. Well, then what are you taking away? Well, we're going to take away social studies because it's not tested. Now, I always say, you know what? I would get rid of everything else and only teach social studies, science, and the arts. Because if you teach social studies, science, and the arts, you can teach everything you need to know about ELA and math in there, and science, obviously. So you need to teach science as well. So science, social studies, I might have said that already. I'm 65 now. Things are just going. But it's social studies, science, the arts, the performing and practical arts. Teach all of that. You could teach all of your literacy and your math through that. Because a math skill in and of itself, don't hate me for saying this, Shanae, but I was a math teacher too. A math skill in and of itself has no life. It is only
Hey.
But think about it. It's only brought to life in the context of application, right?
That's true.
All right. You gave me that point.
Very true. Because a lot of times folks don't know about that math, and they're sitting there going like, when will I bring that algebra into real life situations? I've had that conversation where people are wondering about the more advanced kind of things around math and things like algebra, and not so much of the day-to-day counting, because we have to do that every day, whether we're counting or doing our budgeting and things of that nature. But when you get to the more complicated math like algebra and calculus, then folks are going like, I don't remember the last time that I actually used that in day-to-day life. So that's something that I know a number of folks are always concerned about. They're going like, I don't remember using that. But even to come back to Nancy's point, I do remember that one of the things that I used to remember as a child was there was a lot of educational TV, and I know PBS still exists and a number of other networks still exist, but they were also teaching about principles. I still to this day, and I'm not that far off from you, Nancy, I'm 58, but I still remember hearing like Schoolhouse Rocks and learning about bills because of Schoolhouse Rocks, because you remember that song. It still runs in your brain even to this day. People remember that, and they remember a number of other things like I'm Not Just a Bill, which talked about the bill and everything. And there were a number of great Schoolhouse Rock songs that people still generate and still remember even to this day. So definitely I think a lot of folks had more of that knowledge at that time. So I do see that Flo has joined us, and also got Mary as well. So Flo, I know you're going back and forth. If I remember correctly, I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, Nancy, but you gave a little bit of the introduction about Flo. But Flo, if I remember correctly, and I remember the bios that you sent and everything, but I think she also has another hobby that she's involved in as well, that is something that I think is important for every teacher to be able to do. Because I want to say, Flo, that you're a stand-up comedian as well. So definitely, I want to know how you bring that into the teaching environment, because you are a stand-up comedian. So I want to know how you bring that into the school environment, because I'm thinking you've been one of my favorite teachers because you probably had all kinds of great jokes when you were teaching and everything. So I want to know how you bring that into the schoolroom.
That is a great segue, Mark. That is really great, because it is really woven. My doing comedic stories and stand-up comedy is woven into my being an educator. And here goes. I do, let's see, I'm going to start differently. I do comedy.
No, you need to start with, so I have a mother.
Right. And the only way, who Nancy knew very well, the only way that I could deal with my quintessentially immigrant, Jewish, New York mother was through humor. And she would say things to me that were just beyond belief. And one of my friends said, you need to write these down because someday she's going to go and the comedy writer who lives in her head is going to go with her. Except that she didn't know she was doing comedy. She was just living her life by butting into everybody's business, telling them what to do. Nothing was ever good enough. And so I started keeping notes. And now I had a night table drawer full of notes over a number of years. And it was like, I don't know what I'm doing with it, but it's something Shanae said before, God's way has a way of leading you. And so I just kept putting them in. Go away. I just kept putting them in. And
it's the infamous dog barking during Zoom meeting.
Exactly.
Oh, we should be playing Zoom bingo. So far we've had that. We've had the mute. We've had the disconnect.
Yes, everything's going just the way it's supposed to go. So you will get a kick out of this, Nancy, because this is the norm to a lot of things that happen in life. I was actually, like I said, I'm on the board of the Carolina Theater and actually saw my friend Rebecca Newton, who was our former director, was joining and watching the conversation. But we've been interviewing different candidates, and so far in the interview of the candidates, we've had a dog come in and interrupt the interview. We've also had a cat just pop in the middle because we were actually talking to the staff members, and one of the cats decided that they wanted to join the Zoom meeting also. So, the pets like to have their moments as well. I'm expecting the dog to try to show up with Flo at any second. I'm expecting the dog to pop in at any moment and join the crowd and the conversation. But definitely, I'd love to hear more about your mom and the comedy, but I also wanted to show that we are getting some comments and everything. So definitely going to flash a couple of those on the screen. Gabby Harrington said, hi, everyone. So glad to be here learning with all of you. So definitely appreciate that. Don't know if y'all know any of these folks. I did see that one of my producers is going to make a comment very well, but Tanya Brusco said, love listening to you all talk about education. Amazing leaders, amazing thoughts that make a difference here, and learning about remote and a number of other things that they are learning about here in the conversation. And then Ankit, because we actually are a international platform. So Ankit is one of my producers. I have a couple of producers that are here in North Carolina, as well as some in other places also. But Ankit is actually in New Delhi. So Ankit is actually in New Delhi. So he wanted to say hi to me and to all the guests. Amazing conversation with amazing women. So he's definitely a supporter of the women in his life. He's actually got a young daughter that y'all might meet at the end of the show. She does our little salute to what we should be doing in sense of hand washing and all of that. So she has like a little spot that she puts on at the end, and that's his daughter that does that. So I know that he is a big time supporter of women in his life and is definitely a supporter of the role of education as well. So definitely wanted to say that. And Gabby was also writing back and saying that LAEIC rock. So definitely that conversation.
And interactive technology infused classroom.
So if you share more of that story, Flo, and I also want to bring in Mary as well, but I'd love to hear more about your mother and how that works with comedy and everything.
So hi, Mary. How it works is I collected all of these little jewels of her comedy. And in the early 90s, mid 90s, I was on the board of directors of our local mental health association when we received some very, very sharp cuts for our programs. And I left that meeting and went to do my regular visit to my mother and thinking, what can we do to raise money? And when I arrived there at my mother's apartment, I came out of the elevator and all 4'10" of her were standing in her doorway, scowling. And I said, what's the matter? You're late. Well, I'm always late, Mom. You're late. It didn't even pay for you to come. You may as well turn around and go home because there's no time for a visit. And I thought, I'm going to do a comedy show about my mother to raise money for the Mental Health Association.
Some people hold a bake sale.
And when I got home, because I didn't have a cell phone in those days, when I got home, I laid the idea out to my husband, and he went, yeah. And he's not as loosey-goosey as I am in taking risks. He said, I think you could do it. Just decide on your order, how you want. Do you want to do it in a theater? Do you want to do it in a nightclub environment? Well, my option was the theater. In the college, community college, where I was teaching, I was training occupational therapy assistants. And we did the show to a sellout audience of 400 people.
Oh.
We raised $12,000. And I'm going to tie it to education. And how did I use it, Mark? My students were the ushers.
Oh, wow.
But they had to be trained to act and sound like little New York Jewish mothers. So when they would seat people, bring them to their seats, they would say, come, you'll have a good time. You should enjoy the show. Your daughter is very funny. And indeed, that began, oh my goodness, 28 years ago, that began my sojourn into doing comedic. And what I said that night was how appropriate for me to be doing this for the Mental Health Association, given the fact that it's how I deal with my own mental health through comedy and finding the humor. When I decided at the age of 13 to become an occupational therapist, my mother was beside herself. No, that's not what I had planned for you. You need to be a teacher. Teachers have their summers off. You go to a teacher's college, you'll get married, you'll have your children. She had it all laid out. But I blew it to smithereens because I was indomitable as she was, and I wanted to be an occupational therapist. 10 years into my occupational therapy career as a clinician, I became an educator. I began by teaching one course in a brand new program at Orange County Community College, which is part of the State University of New York system. And I then, within a matter of one semester, the full-time faculty member had to leave, relocate to California. And I decided I loved being in the classroom. And the classroom to me is an opportunity to share my love of my profession and to bring more and more and more people in through education. I have always used comedy. I've always brought, figuratively, my mother into the classroom by giving examples of what to do when you're dealing with a difficult patient, or problem solving and critical thinking, how to get around this resistant, stubborn individual. So it has done me well, very well. And I was at the college and taught for 40 years. and loved it. Absolutely loved it. I retired 2 years ago, but I'm still teaching because I take interns on occupational therapy interns as part of the New York State Occupational Therapy Association. And I'm going to take a deep breath and let you ask me something else or ask Mary something, Mark.
It's actually a question is to actually all of y'all, because one of the people that we have on our show, well, one of our other shows, which is Celebrity Tuesdays, is a guy named Henry Morales. He's actually a filmmaker, and he's always talking about his concerns around mental illness and our young people. So I was wondering, do you think that we're doing enough of that in the educational field? Because he's actually also concerned about what's going on now with so much of this Zoom technology and things of that nature. So he's actually using his films as a platform to talk about that, and he's actually has some teenagers and others, but he's seen like a spike in some of the threats to our young people, whether that's suicide, whether that's drugs, or a number of other things. So I was just wondering, you seeing that we're doing enough of that in the educational realm to actually deal with the mental health of our young people?
Can I jump in?
Yes,
Wait, sorry. I just want to let Adele and Shanae say their 2 cents because I'm looking at the clock and I think you both have to leave soon, right? So put in your 2 cents first, because then we can introduce Mary to the audience, and Mary and Flo and I are here for the duration.
All right.
I think that we can continue to do more, for sure. I think that, and we just read a book about trauma and in classrooms. And so I think teachers now starting to have that conversation. Yes, that one, fostering resilient learners. And about how, because teachers are also feeling some of that as well. I think it's important that that collective experience, and oftentimes in education, we're told not to speak about a certain gamut of things in K-12, but some of the shared experiences or having students see some of those vulnerabilities that you have and being open with students so that students feel that safe place as well. Like, I feel like that's something that we need to continue to be purposeful about, especially now in 2020, since so much has happened. And, calling things what they are and having those open conversations. I think it is important. I think people are getting more comfortable doing that. It's uncomfortable, and a lot of people don't like to speak in that uncomfortable place. But I think it's important having conversations around social justice, around mental health. How are you really feeling? Like, truly, like, what's really going on? All of those things play a part in, success in academia. So the more of those conversations we can have, we're working with teachers and starting those conversations of what that looks like. But for sure, I think continued training will definitely need to come out of this year in regards to very specifically dealing with self-care and dealing with that of, your students. So I will.
Adele. Are you leaving us now, Shanae?
I will tap out. Yes. I have a grad school meeting to get to. School all the time.
Well, thank you for joining me at Marc.
I appreciate it. It was great seeing all of you ladies. And thank you, Marc, for this opportunity. It was very fun having this conversation.
Adele.
Okay.
What's your swan song?
Yeah, I think schools have always been a safe haven for people. Right? That human relationship that a teacher builds with their students and their colleagues. It's one of the first and best places for students who are struggling or in need or all of a sudden have some kind of emergency situation on. Usually it's a teacher that picks up on those cues really early on. So through the years, that human touch of being one-on-one in classrooms has been so important. So I think teachers are true heroes in the truest sense of the word when we talk about, uplifting and maintaining mental health situations for kids. During this time of COVID, I can say with certainty, even my graduate level students and adult learners, there's this lacking of human contact. I've had more phone calls, more Zoom meetings, more just touching base, checking in, because I think people find comfort in that. And if that's enough to sustain them to get to the next day or the next level, great. But I think it's more important, as Shanae was saying, that we can always continue to do more and better. And these times are trying. With, again, a lot of different circumstances between students they've been much more vulnerable also in sharing what's been going on in their personal lives that has been affecting their either work environment or their school environment. Again, in New Jersey, our school districts are a little different up here. There are 600 different school districts. It's not a state model, so there are people in different towns who used to be able to collaborate, and we do the same thing you do. Everybody is doing something different now, and I think there's a lot of stress going on, anxiety, just because it's unknown. So from the teacher level, from the parent level, from the student level, we need to do everything we can to kind of allay their fears, let them know that everything will be okay, refer to services if services are needed. Again, a lot of situations have been shared where students are home alone. Their parents are essential workers. They're alone. They're on the screen taking care of siblings. Again, teachers have a responsibility. If they're young, they're not supposed to be home alone. So there's a lot of situations going on that teachers are addressing besides the actual educational lessons that are going on online. So again, I think it's helping all of us learn to deal with those situations differently, virtually, but they certainly have been heightened. And I think we all need to have our antennas raised to make sure that we continue to just be there for students and parents and each other. So again, joining something like this is great because you get to see friends that you haven't seen in a while and just interact in a different way. So it kind of keeps us moving to the next moment. So yes, I too need to apologize. I have an orientation session that I'm delivering till 8:30 tonight for a brand new teacher leader certification program in New Jersey. So that's what I'm off to doing next. So
their first assignment was just to watch.
I wish. If another time, absolutely. But Mark, thank you for the opportunity. Nancy, Flo, is a pleasure meeting you. Mary is a friend and a colleague. So Mary, have fun. It's been great. It's been a great hour. You'll enjoy it. Nancy, love you guys. Thank you.
You too.
Definitely. Flo, you were going to make a comment before we had to hear from Shanae and Adele.
I'm glad that Nancy did that. I didn't realize Adele and Shanae had to leave. The reason I got so excited, because from my perspective as an occupational therapist with a specialty in pediatrics and mental health, I am very, very concerned about the lack of appreciation for what's going on with kids in the school district. And I don't mean this to be a commercial for Nancy's approach, but more than ever, the learner active, the self-directed approach to education, especially in the middle school and before, is crucial because we are asking the uniqueness of the children we're trying to educate and work with to fit into a cookie cutter mold, which is heightening their anxiety, which is, and they're not feeling successful. They're feeling that they can't live up, which is why we're seeing, and here comes my perspective from the healthcare, increased anxiety attacks, panic attacks, increased suicide attempts in kids in as low as the 3rd and 4th grade up through middle school. And we're asking too much to expect that our teachers are going to pick this all up. But if everybody were in it together and could go at their own pace, their own individuality, so this is a very sensitive issue for me. I also have a 12-and-a-half-year-old grandson who encountered the perfect storm, literally. He entered the 6th grade. His hormones were going. He had an anxiety disorder, and it just exploded. And he's incredibly bright. He is so self-directed, but didn't have that opportunity. So as you can see, I am quite passionate about that.
Definitely, and that's an issue that I know a lot of folks are concerned about. Like I said, Henry had brought it up a number of times. He actually brings it up pretty regularly on our show that he does on Tuesday. So he's actually, I did not see it yesterday. I'm pretty sure he brought it up on that one, and I've been on a couple of these discussions where he has brought it up and everything. Nancy, if you could, I'd love for you to introduce Mary to the audience as well, because I see that she has joined us. So I would love to know more about what she's all about. And as Nancy knows, I told her that one of the things that we do, and as part of the online dinner party, is there's like an ongoing trivia question. So I hadn't got to the trivia banner, so I'm going to throw those on the screen. So if folks know the answers, then hopefully they can answer the question, because like I mentioned before, there's going to be a mystery guest at the end, one in education and one from the field of, well, the country of India that comes out of the celebrity world. But this is the quote for the current person, and that's the quote that's going across the screen now, which is about strength and things of that nature. So that's one of the clues, and there'll be other things that folks will see as well. But there are two ways of exerting one's strength. One is pushing down, the other is pulling up. So that is the quote that is going across the screen right now, and hopefully folks are watching and they can tell me who that person might be. But they are from the world of education. I can't tell y'all that much. And then they also said that success waits patiently for anyone who has the determination and strength to seize it. So that's some of the quotes that this particular person has given in the past. So I'll continue the conversation. So that's just some of the clues that are going on, and there may be some other clues that will appear later on also. So actually, I'll give one more right now, which is the happiest person are those who do the most for others. The most miserable are those who do the least. So that sounds like something around the field of education. So that's definitely a great quote that I'm sure many educators will be able to relate to, which is the happiest persons are those who do the most for others. The most miserable are those who do the least. So I know that so far I've not been having much luck with folks guessing either on the show or in the audience, but I've got a bunch of educators, so maybe they'll actually have better luck than some of the other folks. So if you got any idea, you can try to bust in there and tell me who you think the mystery guest will be later on. But that's kind of our trivia aspect of this show and how we do this and everything. But Nancy, if you would, please introduce us once again to Mary and tell us a little bit about what Mary's all about.
So those are tough quotes. You got me thinking, but so Mary, I met recently through Adele, and Mary and Adele have a background, which, you know, Mary can give more about herself, but I know Mary to be a literacy expert. She's working at also New Jersey, I have to get that right, New Jersey City University as a professor in the literacy department, and is also involved in the George Street Playhouse that Adele started to talk a little bit about, so we can get more out of that, out of Mary on that. But Mary, why don't you give us your background and tell us, what brings you here tonight to join the Good Freaking Vibes dinner hour?
I'm loving that mug. Hello, everyone, and Mark, thanks so much for having me on. Flo, it's great to meet you. And so essentially what you heard from Nancy is basically it. I am a professor in the Literacy Education Department at New Jersey City University. I am just rolling up to, hard to believe, but my 9th year there. Before that, I was a school administrator in elementary school here in New Jersey. So that's kind of my life. Before that, I was a middle school language arts teacher. So I can tell you about middle school and about that amazing period of time that we all kind of go through. And it definitely has its bumps and its challenges. For me, it's one of the most amazing ages to teach. It truly is. Love it, love it, love it. So that's a little bit about me professionally. Nancy mentioned that in addition to having Adele as a colleague at NJCU, she's a board member actually with the George Street Playhouse. She's involved with some work. She's invited me and a few other colleagues onto some work where the teaching artists there are working with teachers and bringing in social emotional learning approaches, culturally responsive teaching approaches to their classrooms, in particular to their classrooms while we are in this remote space. And so, when you mentioned the idea of emotional wellness, of mental wellness, one of the thoughts that I had in as the conversation was going, not only to the importance of that, but to the role that teachers can play, kind of in supporting a space where you're safe, a space where it's okay to struggle, and that struggle can be defined in any number of ways. But that it's all right. And also, Shanae, before she left, mentioned the fact that there should be an intentionality to our work as teachers, and in terms of supporting our students' wellness and our colleagues' wellness, teachers, higher education folks such as me, and all that work with children. I believe that, we a few months ago, we had our world sort of turned on its side. Our context and the ways that we understood our work shifted in ways that I don't know that anyone really could have ever imagined. So is anyone okay right now? Well, you know what? To be honest with you, we're all in transition, working to make sense of this new environment, working our way through the best way to support our students. So we struggle in doing that. We're works in progress in doing that. And it's important, as Shanae said, to just be forthright about that. And it's an important starting point.
So, Larry, just really quickly, I was curious, what is it about middle schools that you really enjoy? Because like I said, I've got two nephews. One of them is actually in middle school. So I was wanting to know what it is about that middle school years that are so appealing to you as a teacher.
First, it's the unique level of energy at that point. If you step into a middle school, you will feel like you've moved into a different kind of force field space. It truly is. Students are open like they never have been, to understanding new ideas, to kind of taking on new ways of understanding the world. And part of that is because they themselves are changing. They're changing physically like crazy. They're changing, socially and emotionally themselves. So all this change equates to a level of energy, a level of receptiveness to ideas and growth and learning. It also brings with it, I will say, though, a level of vulnerability at that stage, that, if you're a teacher and you love that stage, you're exceptionally attuned to it. And it's tremendously rewarding to be a part of kids' journey in that moment.
Yeah, definitely. And just really quickly, Mary, what brought you into the whole field of teaching? I was being curious of what brought you into the world of teaching and what made you decide you wanted to be a teacher when you were first getting into the field.
Wow. That's a really good question. So I grew up the daughter of an elementary school teacher and high school guidance counselor. So naturally, the last thing I ever wanted to do was be a teacher, right? Growing up and, and through college. But I think once I got out of college, did some work in corporate spaces. Again, you and I are around the same age, Mark. And I found that it really wasn't as rewarding as what I thought it would be. And that I kind of reset and took a look at what was around me right from the beginning, to be honest with you, and was interested in becoming a teacher. I actually started teaching in El Paso, Texas, and moved back to New Jersey, where I grew up, and have been here since 1994. So, and all in that middle range, 6th grade, 7th grade, a little bit of 8th grade, but all within that range, and all largely English language arts within that language development and literacy development.
And speaking of questions, we did have a question from the audience and everything, but Gabby Richard Harrington was asking Flo whether your grandson was learning remotely now, or whether remote learning was better for him or more difficult. So they wanted to know your reflections on remote learning and how that was working with your grandson.
It's actually, Gabby, much better for him. When the pandemic came, we all said to him, especially his OT grandmother, "Wow, Caleb, the rest of the world is catching up to you with anxiety now." It's better because he doesn't have to deal with navigating the middle school with a whole bunch of other people. But of course, it has its disadvantages. But he is doing very well. He's a lot better. Thank you for asking.
And Tanya was also having a statement to you, Miss Mary. So she was just saying, so true about Miss Mary. We are kindred spirits. As a former 7th grader, looks like they were a former 7th grade ELA teacher and mom of a 7th grade student. So they were saying that that is definitely the best. So they were definitely giving you praises, and Gabby was just saying, good to hear about your grandson, Flo. So definitely we are having some engagement with the audience as well. So we do appreciate that also. Nancy, if you could talk a little bit about the model that you have and everything, because I know that you've got the 7 attribute program and everything. So I'd love to hear more about that and how folks can actually get involved with all that you're doing in your corporation.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. I think it's so interesting how the universe conspires to have people connected, because we kind of put this group together, but every time somebody opens their mouth, I feel like, oh, now they have a connection to somebody else in the group and somebody else in the group. And so, Mary, I was a middle school teacher, loved middle school. I started in elementary. I went to middle school under duress. I told my principal, but if there's an opening in the elementary, I want to go back. And when there was an opening, I was like, heck no, I love middle school. And I love that all 3 of you have dabbled in the theater arts. So, and then Mary, our guests who will be arriving as soon as they get out of their meeting, are both with the state education department in Texas. So I find it fascinating how the little nuggets drop and we realize how very connected we are. And I think that's a message that we need to share to the world, is we are all interconnected. We are all connected. We are one. And, that's my 2 cents on the world. So I had designed this framework called the Learner Active Technology Infused Classroom, and have written books called Students Taking Charge on that. But what happened in March, when schools did close, and we did hear from teachers who were running Lighty classrooms saying it was easy for their students, I sat down and I thought, okay, how do we modify it so that we make sure that whatever structures we're using, we can use at home as well as in school? So as an example, one of the things we use is as a help board. If the student needs help from a teacher, what they're supposed to do first is reread the directions. Is it possible? Because again, we're trying to create efficacy. Is it possible that you just need to read the directions and the answer is right there? If not, look at the resource area, which is now a digital resource area. Is there a how-to sheet or something that would answer your question? If not, look at the peer expert board, which is now a digital board. And there's someone else in the class who could help you with that. And if not, then put your name on the digital help board for the teacher. Well, prior to March, that was a physical help board in the classroom where you would just write your name. Then when March hit, the teachers all made digital boards. So the kids would put their name on a digital board and the teacher would be able to see who needed help. And my point to teachers is, so stick with the digital board because it works as well at home as it does in school, whereas a physical board doesn't. And what we don't want is we don't want students to say, oh, I need help. Wait, where am I? I'm home. Therefore, I go to this digital board. Wait, I'm in school. Therefore, I walk up to that board. I mean, even though that sounds silly, that's cognitive load. That's causing your brain to have to stop and think and figure it out. And it's a waste of time because that kind of shifting back and forth between venues is going to be problematic. So what I did is I really thought about what is necessary within a school environment that would allow us to, learn anywhere, anytime. And I developed these 7 attributes of hybrid learning. Probably the best place to get anything, on me, well, two places. One is my consulting company, which is IDE Corp. So that's IDECORP.com, because you can download my white paper on the hybrid learning environments and what it could look like and the 7 attributes and all of that. I will have a book coming out, probably take about 5 months from now. My publisher's listening, going like, when are we going to see the book? It's the dinner hour. I love that picture because I've been seeing little slices of it behind us, and I've been trying to put it together. So that colorful shirt was actually on a person at the table.
Yes, that was actually a person on the table and everything. That was actually an event that I went to and everything. So I will sometimes post actual dinner things and everything, but I was putting on the website that folks can see the website that you were referring to, so as a shared screen so folks can actually see a little bit of what you're talking about, but definitely was letting them know a little bit of what you've got going on and all of that. So definitely I'm appreciating all the great work that you're doing in our community. One of the things is that we're a global network. Like I said, we've got some producers out of Australia, some producers out of England and other places. So what kind of advice would the four of y'all give to folks about education that are watching that might be trying to create this kind of model in another part of the globe? Because we do have some folks that are, like I said, in other parts of the globe. Of course, most of us are here in the United States, but we do have listeners and watchers from around the globe. So what kind of advice would you give to folks that are trying to do this kind of programming on a global side or in their own country?
You know, it's interesting, again, on the connection fronts, you've mentioned India a few times now. And of course, I think you saw me on Shree's show, Shree's Srinivasan show. I have actually partnered with a group called the Princeton Hive that is taking my work and producing it in self-paced courses out of India. So fundamentally, that we are looking to really help people in Southeast Asia to think differently about remote instruction and what you can do to teach, et cetera. And I think, quite honestly, it's the same all over the world. I think, point one is give kids a problem, or better yet, let them identify a problem they want to solve. But look at your curriculum and think, if my students knew this curriculum, what problem could they solve? Once you put the problem out there, now you've got the kids hooked. The next thing to do is to say, what standard am I looking for? So we say design a rubric that gives kids, this is what I'm looking for, but these are the columns that'll get you there, so that you have both a destination and a pathway, and then have an activity list filled with a variety of activities that students can engage in, including, I'm a big fan of video and teacher-made video. Yes, you can go out and find everything on the website, that you want to find, but I think teacher-made videos are so important because students need to hear your words and your face and your voice. I know, Mary, you and I were talking about this, that you're creating your compendium of videos, because you can also customize it. I can present to my students and then I can say, okay, why don't you try this? I'm going to put up a problem. I'm going to ask you to pause the video, work out the problem, and then start it again. And then as they do that, then the teacher can say, all right, so let me show you what I got. And let's see if you got the same thing. And so we actually say there are 5 different types of videos that you can make. And if you go to my blog, which you can find off the website, I have a video up there called 5 Types of Videos for Teachers to Rock the Fall. And basically it's, get the problem in place, get the rubric in place, get a variety of activities, including the videos from the teacher, and then do what is the most important piece of it, which is facilitate learning. Be in and out of Zoom sessions with kids, small group discussions, small group instruction, facilitating individualized learning, which is going to allow you to reach everybody rather than thinking of yourself as the presenter of information. And I was putting it out there early on that we can't just think that because kids are at home, we should put a webcam in the corner and live feed lessons. It is the worst possible approach to instruction. So we do not want to just live feed the lessons we used to do. This is the opportunity to #do something different. And I start my new book by taking you back to the year 1666, where a young man who was studying in Cambridge was sent home because of the bubonic plague. And this young man was sent home to social distance the way we are all now. And so he was sitting outside and kind of like doing some studies. And he saw an apple fall from a tree to the ground. And he started asking himself, I wonder why that apple fell to the ground. And no matter how high up it would be, would it still fall to the ground? And during the bubonic plague, Sir Isaac Newton, although at the time he wasn't Sir, just plain old Isaac, actually developed the laws of his theories on gravity, on optics, motion. He developed the beginnings of calculus and defined modern day physics. So I'm like, come on, if Isaac Newton could do that without an iPad and a cell phone or internet access, surely we can figure out how to make education something different and work in different ways.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you're so right. Because I know a lot of folks. Yeah, I know a lot of folks have been engaged in even creating new opportunities for themselves because of what's going on with COVID. So they're finding new jobs, they're finding new careers, and even new hobbies and things along that line and everything. I was wondering, I'd love to hear from all three of you. What do you think is the biggest stereotype that folks have about teachers, and how do y'all try to alleviate those stereotypes? Because I do think there are a number of stereotypes that are out there, and I just wanted to know what you think are the worst stereotypes and how y'all go about alleviating those stereotypes and fighting against those. I'll go to you first, Mary.
Wow. It's interesting. I would have to say, I don't really encounter too many stereotypes, Mark. The only one that I would share is the idea that, and Flo's mom mentioned this first, that you've got your summers off. And this notion that, June 15th, or if you're in other parts of the country, Memorial Day happens. And then you can re-engage maybe around Labor Day or whatever it is. And that's absolutely, not the case. Summer's a time that's really jam-packed, and increasingly so, with professional learning opportunities. I know you'd asked about myths. I actually wanted to comment, and I'll wait until Flo goes and discuss, rumors about teachers, but I actually have a comment or two when it comes time that I'd like to, tack on to Nancy's discussion of her model.
So if you got any stereotypes, Flo, then we can go there, and then I'll definitely come back to you, Mary, so that you can tack on to what Nancy's got to say.
Oh, me? You want me to go next? Oh,
yes.
I think the biggest stereotype, and it feeds into what Mary just said, is teachers have it easy. They have such an easy job, and they only work 9 to 3 or 8 to 3. I think that myth was exploded in the second week of the pandemic, when parents were now, you want me to do what and how? I'm not a teacher. And suddenly, teachers became heroes.
Yeah, definitely. I've actually noticed that even with some friends of mine that are higher ed teachers, because I know one of them was already doing this kind of like Zoom platforms and doing a number of these things, but a lot of their colleagues had not been doing it. So they were actually ahead of the curve because they had already been doing it because they were in those kind of like online universities. So they already had to use a lot of these platforms, whereas unfortunately a number of our regular colleges, whether they be the standard colleges or the HBCUs or our high schools, had not always done that. So they were kind of behind the curve, as my friend Janine puts it, and everything, whereas now they're catching up. But I do know a number of folks felt that they were at least a little bit ahead because they were already doing online learning, kind of like what you've been doing, Nancy. So I'd love to hear, Mary, your comments to what Nancy was saying earlier.
Sure. And really it kind of even goes back to Adele's observation that in New Jersey, this is one example. We literally, for our tiny state, we have hundreds of school districts, some K-8, then separate high school districts where you've got 2 or 3 K-8 districts that send their students there. Why that exists is a separate issue. But the idea is with all of those districts, you have literally that much diversity in terms of use of technology, teachers' capacity to use technology, their the ability to use a platform or a model such as what Nancy has created or something like that, or not. And so in March, when schools closed, and we had teachers in some of the partner schools that work with New Jersey City University that had been using Google Classroom, just as an example, all along. So the idea of moving, to online wasn't smooth, but it was still something that didn't require, mountains to be moved. On the other hand, we had other places where children, teachers were hustling to get packets of handouts ready. And, the teaching was, pick out a pack of worksheets and handouts and what have you, do those, have somebody bring those back to the school, and then, pick up, packet B and then packet C, while folks in board offices and things scrambled to get Chromebooks and what have you. So, I provided 2 ends of a spectrum, but truly, in our hundreds of districts, there are points all along that continuum of where kids were. and where teachers are. So, and I don't know if this came up earlier in your conversation, but even when we do go back to face-to-face learning, elements of this experience will remain. The notion of being able to refer to instructional videos, such as which is one of the elements of Nancy's 5 videos, is the instructional category, right? So that there should be no reason in the world why that shouldn't be with us, right? So, I can slow it down. I can watch that tape numerous times just for that kind of support. Well, that's an important piece that's going to stick. So naturally, I think, all right, well, fine. We've got these hundreds of districts. We've got this continuum of where people are. And the first thing that comes to my mind as a teacher educator is, all right, well, what do we need to do first in supporting our education majors, moving along and preparing them to enter this new world of education, which is evolving, but also in terms of supporting our ongoing professional development for folks that are already in the field, but that haven't had exposure to ways of doing school, such as Nancy's model illustrates.
Yeah, you raised a couple of interesting questions that I wanted to kind of drill down on and everything. One is, we've talked about the need for teachers, and I know there's always been a talk about teacher pay and the fact that teachers don't get paid enough, and therefore there's a shortage in some places of teachers. So I'd love to hear from all of y'all's thoughts about the need for more teachers, and also even getting teachers from non-traditional places, because I know there's been a push to even find teachers, as you just alluded to, Mary, out of the corporate world and things of that nature. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that from all three of you, actually.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll jump off. The severity of the teacher shortage depends on a few things. One, where you are in the country, but two, what you're looking to teach. Is there a shortage in early childhood to the extent that there is secondary physics? No, right? So, it depends on the subject area. And in STEM fields, those are hard to fill positions. So we're definitely experiencing, these types of shortages. And it's a conversation I really feel like districts and state level boards of education are grappling with, in particular in these shortage areas. How is it that we can win folks that are science majors, just to take an example, have an array, have the world is their oyster in terms of career options. How do we showcase our field? How do we showcase the tremendous rewards that come with a career in education? And so we're grappling with this and raising questions around that. Just as an example, one of the things we're looking at in New Jersey is tuition assistance, scholarships. There's some other incidental expenses that come along with teaching that aren't so minor. Education majors pay hundreds of dollars in licensure examinations, for example. And so conversations are being had around how we can reimburse, or in other ways support students as they face this $100, several $100 payment experience that happens at the end of your college education.
I'd love to hear from you as well, Nancy, because I know that is a conversation that even happens here in North Carolina and a number of other places, is around the issue of teacher pay. I've actually got a good friend of mine, Brian Prophet, that's involved with our local teacher union and everything. So I'd just love to hear your thoughts around whether we're even doing a good enough job of paying the teachers that are out there. You're on mute.
We have bingo, Zoom bingo. I would say around most of the country that teachers need to be paid more. We recruit teachers from all over the country, and we find consistently, whereas in New York probably comes first, New Jersey second. I'm not excluding any states because I don't know exactly about Connecticut, et cetera. But generally in the Northeast, the pay is good. And can it be better? Yes. Particularly, I remember when I was teaching, if you were at kind of the low end of the stick, well, actually, if you first got there, you got a good starting salary. And then in the middle, it kind of languishes. But then if you stuck around for a while and you got more degrees, et cetera, well, then you could have a nice job up at the six-figure world. But in most states, that the six-figure world is not even possible. And so I do think there's a disadvantage that we believe that we should not have a national education system, that education should be left up to states' rights. But at the same time, I know that the idea of the Common Core, although perhaps in practice it didn't work out as well, but the idea was we are no longer a country where, you live and die in one place. We're a country where people move around. And I personally, I think, went to school in 4 different states. And I do remember going from one state to another, and I was in 2nd grade, and the teacher said, write your name in script on the paper. And I didn't know how to write in script, so I put my name in print. And she said to me, don't you know how to write in script? So I was like, okay. And I put little lines to connect all the letters. And I'm like, there you go, script. And she's like, didn't they teach you how to write in script? And I was like, no. Then I realized that the only thing kids knew how to write was their name in script, So I mastered that relatively quickly. But it just pointed out again, actually, when I came, I was in Massachusetts, and I moved to a school district in New York when I was older, about 6th grade. And in Massachusetts, I was in the gifted classes. And when I got to New York, they put me in the average classes. And I remember coming home and saying to my parents, I think I'm in the wrong class. Like, the kids are throwing spitballs and airplanes and teachers are yelling and no learning is getting done, And then they said, oh, but if, because I grew up in the time, but if that's where the school put you, that's where you belong. And then I went back and it was like, knock, knock. Hello, Mom, Dad, listen. I think what's happening is that a state is looking at another state like, well, their education can't be as good as our education. So my parents did go and talk to the principal, and I finally got put up into all the advanced classes. But it was amazing. Like, I saw education. As a matter of fact, when I was in kindergarten, now we lived in Michigan, and kindergarten was compulsory when most states did not have compulsory kindergarten. And I became school phobic, did not want to go to school. And I had a teacher who used to, and she really didn't mean to do this, but she lied to me. She would say to my mother, because I wanted my mom to come to school, and she'd say, well, you give her to me and I'm going to have her come and sit right up next to me. And then you leave, And so she would tell me my mother could stay. She would bring me up to the front where I'd be sitting next to her, and I would turn around and look, and my mother was gone. And that was it. I'm like, I'm not coming back to this place. Like, they're not being truthful. So I go home, and, my parents fought with me and said, like, I remember my father saying, well, if you're not going to go to school, you're going to sit on that couch. And I felt like I sat there forever, but I wasn't going to school. So finally, and I like to use this, when I do my keynote presentations to teachers at the opening of school, when we got toward the end of the year, the principal called my parents in and said, Nancy's going to have to repeat kindergarten because she has not attended enough days. And my father thought, she's kind of a smart kid. Like, I really hate to see her repeat kindergarten. So I always say my parents did what any self-respecting parents would do. We moved. And we moved to Massachusetts, where kindergarten wasn't compulsory. I completed 1 month of kindergarten, but I had a teacher who got me. And she said my mom could stay, and but she was very clever because she had my seat so that I could see my mother. And then at some point, she was moving seats around, and she moved me where I couldn't see my mother. But I remember, like, I would just get up out of my seat, walk back, see that she was there, and then walk back to my seat. Like, the world is good, right? And then she would always say, oh, Mrs. Sula, could you take this note to the office for me? It's so good that you're here, like classroom helper. And I learned later that those notes were bogus, that she just wanted my mother to leave for 5 minutes and then come back to see how I did, and then leave for 10 minutes and leave for 15 minutes. And then one day I just said to my mother, you don't have to go to school with me anymore. I'm fine. And then I went off to school. It was just like a switch. Like, I my world was in my control again, and I was good. But I remember thinking at 5 years old, that teacher made a difference in my life. I want to be a teacher because I want to make a difference. And that has always been my thing. How am I going to make a difference? And so, I got into the field of teaching. So fast forward to I guess I was in my 4th year in teaching, and jobs were hard to come by because I was in middle school, and the kids who would have been coming to school, you remember the Vietnam War? So we had the Vietnam War. All of our men were overseas, and there wasn't a lot of activity going on that would give us more children because they were all overseas. So we have Generation X, which is the tiniest generation, but I was teaching middle school when they hit middle school. So we were losing numbers and losing teachers in droves. And they warned me that they were going to be cutting teachers up to 11 years tenure. And I'd only been teaching for 4 years. So I knew the writing was on the wall. And I said to my dad, you know what? I took the law boards. I'm going to go to law school. And my dad said to me, you know, lawyers are a dime a dozen like teachers. Why don't you go into computer science? And I was like, computer science? Those are like nerdy guys with pocket protectors. And he said, no, I really think you'd like it. He said, I'm going to pay for you to be on a computer system to program. You get yourself a book, teach yourself programming language. Tell me you don't love it. I loved it. So I actually left and went out into the real world for a bit. But here's what happened. When I was teaching, I would come, 8:30 to 3:30. Obviously, you get there a little early, you stay a little later. But I would come home and have to just sit down and veg out. It was like I needed like cookies and milk. And my friends would call and say, you want to go out? And then, you go out and you're like, oh, but I got to be home by 9. Or like, I got to be home. I got to get in bed by 10 because I have to teach the next day. And I remember just on this role of how exhausting a teaching was. And then I got this job in business. Well, it was a 9-hour day with an unpaid lunch hour. I traveled farther. I had to drive an hour each way to get there. And fundamentally, my life was filled with work. But when I got home at night, and usually it was around 7, 8 o'clock at night, I'm calling my friends. We're going out, partying. We're out drinking till 1, 2 in the morning, rolling back in, go to sleep, get up the next morning, go off to work. I was fine. And I just thought, I guess I grew up and learned how to manage time. But I woke up one day and said, what am I doing here in the real world, climbing the corporate ladder? They had just promoted me to a manager. And I was like, I always wanted to be in education. Like that was my calling. What am I doing? I'm on the wrong path. So it just so happened that was in the 80s when technology was coming into school. And this one school district was shocked that they had an actual computer programmer who wanted to, as the superintendent put it, take a 40% salary cut to come back into education. He said, I figured you had to be crazy, but, you are crazy, so you can have the job if you want it. And I remember that when I went back then and started teaching again, it was like 3:30 again. I needed my cookies and milk. I was exhausted. I had to go to bed early. And that's when, Mark, I was able to see the difference between teaching and other professions is that you are responsible for people's lives. When I was in the business world, I was responsible for multi-million-dollar contracts. And of course, you didn't want to lose one. But if you lost one, you're kind of like, okay, we'll pick up another one. Whereas a kid, you see some of these kids and you're saying like, oh, are they going to make it? Are they going to survive? What are they going to be doing? Will they make it to adulthood? That's devastating, emotionally devastating. And I think that we don't give teachers enough credit for the emotional tax, if you will, that it takes to be a teacher. And I think that for that, I say, take the summer off because, you've got to have some of that, like, let it go in order to come back and do that. I think that what education needs in general is I'm saying much better. We don't have one, a PR person, because I think we have to convince the world and just I don't want to take up all the time for my colleagues here, but just a couple of more points. We fund our schools in America through the local real estate tax base. And people will say to me like, well, I don't know why I have to pay taxes because I don't even have kids in school. And I keep saying, you're not paying your own kids' tuition. You're paying to raise up an efficacious citizenry of the United States. Like that's what it has to be about. But no one sees it that way. And then I think on the teacher side, we've got, the challenge of, on the one hand, we need to create teaching situations where good teachers get to keep teaching. And, a principal just can't come in from a new school and decide he wants to bring his friends or she wants to bring her friends with her and fire a bunch of teachers. So we have teachers unions to protect them. But then in some ways, teachers unions are protecting teachers that, really aren't pulling their weight. So we've got a lot of little issues to work out. But I think that I think the pandemic is going to definitely drive some people into teaching and other people out. And we might find a new norm, like I've been saying to superintendents with whom I'm working. Well, now that we're redesigning instruction, you also need to redesign your process for interviewing and recruiting teachers, because we need to make sure that we're getting now the right fit of why you're going into the job and making sure it's a worthy reason.
And definitely some great points you were making there, Nancy. Gabby was saying that online learning may allow outside professionals to teach a class or two in public schools while they hold down another job. So then they also said they would need to be in school all day long. I'm not sure if they meant they would not need to be in school all day long or whether they were saying that in that sense. So that's what they wrote and everything. But definitely, I do agree that we're going to see more online learning and things of that nature. I was actually interested in the comment you made about that whole thing of being a protester as a young person and as a young child and everything, because I remember something very similar. I actually was homeschooled for about a year and a half before moving to a rural town in North Carolina. And part of the reason I was homeschooled was because I was protesting something. I don't remember what it was. It was some sort of mandatory test or something like that. And my parents actually backed me. So they pulled me out of school, and I taught for about a year and a half. Well, my mom taught me as well as Dad did a little bit as well for about a year and a half. And then they got me back into the school system in the 6th grade, I believe it was. But definitely I had that time of definitely getting out and all of that. So that was a very enjoyable experience. So I definitely believe in the process of our teachers and our students doing some protests as well. I think that we got another guest. I think they may be joining us from Texas. I believe you said that they may be joining us from Texas. So Shannon Terry apparently is involved in the teaching field as well. So I would love for you to introduce us to Shannon and what Shannon is all about.
So I collected Shannon about a little over a year ago, right, Shannon?
That's correct.
A little over a year ago when I was at a conference and we were kind of put together. I called it a matchmaking conference because they found, the provider, like we provide PD, and then Shannon was working at the Dallas school system. And so she was looking for PD providers and we were, so we met. But the funny thing is, as we were sitting looking through materials that I had with me, she noticed that there was a blog post that I wrote on September 15th. And she said, "You wrote my blog post on my birthday." And I'm like, wait a second, when's your birthday? Turns out we share a birthday. And then on top of that, we talked about doing the Myers-Briggs letters because, and Flo's husband actually could come on and type all of us. But we talked about letters and we have the exact same letters. And now we found we also have a love of craft beers with high alcoholic content.
Yes. Yes.
So only on the weekends, of course. So Shannon moved on from Dallas, and she's now at the Texas Education Agency in charge of division director of, fancy-assed programs, I think it is.
Right? That's correct. You got it. Spot on.
Go ahead, Shannon. Tell us all about yourself, and it's good to see you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Glad you could join us, Shannon. We've been having a very lively conversation about teaching and all of that. So definitely glad that you could join us. Also, I would love to know how the teaching profession is going there in Texas. I'm here in North Carolina. I know a number of our guests are around New Jersey and Newark area. And then we've also had one from Florida area. And of course, we've got global folks that are watching throughout the world and everything. But I just wondered if you could talk about how you got engaged in teaching and also what brought you to the Texas school system.
Well, you betcha. Your first question was, how are things going in Texas, in the Lone Star State? I will tell you, we have 1,274 districts in Texas. They're all independent school districts, so just a little bit of the landscape there. How's it going? Well, of course, we're academically focused, but dynamically different by design is what I like to say. We have all of the versions that I've heard the guests here speak about in terms of hybrid, blended, face-to-face, virtual, remote, distance. We have all of these names for how we're adapting to our new reality, and happy to talk about those in any level of depth of interest. I came to education by an alternative path, if you will. I wanted to be an ambassador and travel the world. and then realized the world was at my fingertips in terms of our student population and the educators and administrators that serve our children. And so I felt that would be a calling where I could fulfill this need to really reach out and experience the world, but experience it through people, not necessarily through geography. Came from a long line of educators. And so certainly that had an influence. I became immensely interested in the Spanish language and the Spanish culture. And so found my path to education as a bilingual educator. And actually went through, I was almost finished graduating from college with all my credentials to be a teacher, and decided, by golly, I've waited long enough to marry my high school sweetheart, and I'm just going to do it before I finish. And so I went through an alternative certification route, which actually I think served me well because we had really intensive support. Although I had a foundation laid, right? We had intensive support from our professional learning teams, and actually started in Dallas and finished in Dallas, although took a tour of North Texas in the meanwhile, and really learned a lot from peers. And so it's formed the basis of what I believe about education, that learning is social, that we learn through connection. And I think that's the perfect segue into this conversation around not only Dr. Sola's work related to the LATIC model, and then now the 7 essentials of hybrid instruction. But I think the time is now. I'll say one last thing before I in my little monologue introduction here. I remember a pivoting point in terms of what really created a high conviction around this work that started way before the pandemic, right? I spoke with a group of students who probably are our best source of information in terms of being our compasses to navigate the path ahead. And I asked them, how do you feel when you walk into our buildings, referring to our brick and mortar buildings, right? And my heart dropped and my passion grew when one of the students said, well, I feel like I am walking into the past and leaving the future behind. And that was a powerful moment for me, and even as I speak it today. So you'll hear me say, I always try to get it in the space, every space I'm in, that we must have a mind for the future, with the future in mind, and really need to look at time agnostic solutions that I think the pandemic has really allowed us to usher in and begin conversations about. So that's a little bit about
I appreciate that. And one of the things I want to bring in another guest as well, and I'll learn more about him also. But before we get to that, one of the things that I was really curious about, and I'd love to hear from you, Nancy, as well as anybody else that wants to jump in the conversation, is Texas is, of course, a very large state. And I know a number of folks have been concerned about access and accessibility, because while we're doing remote learning, not everybody is able to have access to computers and things of that nature. So I know that's been a concern within the educational community. So I guess I'll turn that to you, Shannon, since you run this large network and everything in terms of the states and everything. But how are y'all reaching the folks that are in the more rural parts of Texas? Because Texas definitely has some very big cities like Dallas and Houston, but there are a number of rural areas that don't always have that kind of equipment. So how are y'all maintaining and getting the equipment to them?
Well, I really appreciate that question. And in full transparency, not as well as we need to. I actually am going to turn that question over to Roland, if you don't mind. He has been instrumental while we both serve on a committee or task force that the governor's put forward called Operation Connectivity. He interacts daily finding solutions for that very question, and can bring you some really exciting news as well as challenges that are still before us. So, Roland, I'm passing the baton to you.
Okay, so I'll start off by responding to the question. Am I causing an echo here?
Shannon, mute your mic.
Mute.
If we all mute ourselves until we want to talk, we might get rid of the, now that I have a lot of people in this dinner party.
Okay.
Hi, Roland. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for inviting me, Nancy. in June, Texas kicked off something called Operation Connectivity, where we took a very specific emphasis on trying to reach those students. We don't have, 100% precise statistics, but we estimate about 500,000 students living in areas where connectivity was not readily available. Mainly, and actually, if you actually looked at a map, there is a small area in East Texas and a very large area in West Texas. This generally is because when network providers start building out networks, it generally occurs along interstate highways, because those are easier pathways to lay fiber down. And so in kind of working through all of that, we vetted several solutions, and I can't actually tell you about a couple of them because I'm aware of them under NDA. So, but
is this top secret Texas stuff?
Yeah. There are solutions for that. And especially around January, they might start to become evident or available in those areas. But there are solutions for that there are companies working on different ways of getting connectivity to areas that are not necessarily associated with where what they call long haul fiber has been laid. But it is a problem. Right now, it is not solved. So we are going to have students who may, if they are trying to do remote learning, may miss out on a if you go back to March, we're talking about maybe 2 or 3 6 weeks of learning there. So I strongly suspect those districts probably went to in person.
Appreciate you making those comments and everything. I want to come back to Shannon and everything. And one of the questions I had for you is that definitely Texas, as I said, is a very large state with a lot of educational solutions and problems and everything. So I was just wondering, what are some of the other issues that you're dealing with in the big state of Texas, and particularly with remote learning? As I mentioned at the beginning of this show, here in North Carolina, where I'm based at, we're seeing more of our states starting to go leaning back toward trying to do some more in-person learning. So are y'all seeing that push as well in Texas? Is it a push to having a more in-person learning and a push to having more of a hybrid mix where it's a combination of in-person and remote learning?
That is a great question. And I'd have to say that given the diverse landscape of Texas, it's really a little bit of all. We are seeing, of course, our state requires reporting related to COVID cases within the schools and maintain dashboards to that end. And we have, I believe it was 0.2% of our students that since returning to the buildings, we have had instances of COVID. So overall, I interpret that as a positive in terms of it not being as rampant as we had thought. So obviously, a lot of the challenges that are being faced across the state relate to systems that are having to adapt to not only guidance from the CDC and local entities and what have you related to reporting around the health status of our students in the building, but also the domino effect of that, right? So once you have a reporting system and you're monitoring the health and welfare of our students, then when you move to the different models that are available, how is that informed? Is that the only data piece that's informing our decisions around children? Because we know, as we look at statistics across our nation, that there are unintended consequences of students not being in the building, just as there are unintended consequences of students being in the building. So we really are seeing our districts wrestle with that decision in different ways, with different catalysts causing different responses. We just had released, and we have a media clips that come through on a daily basis, so we keep a pulse on activities around the state. And some of them are related to, of course, obviously the concern of the health of our children, but others are related to, we have really high expectations that the panelists here today have already talked about, high expectations of our teachers. And I think where we might be missing an opportunity, but with the best intentions forging ahead, is matching those high expectations with high levels of support. And so what's happening is we tend as human beings to default to what we know, which in many cases gives us comfort. It's not always the best path to default to what we know. And right now, defaulting to what we know is, okay, let's bring them all back. Let's bring them all back. But even bringing them all back is not where we were before and where we are now, because we have certain provisions that have to be met within the buildings. So all around the world with my answer, I realize I really believe strongly that the greatest thing we can do right now is to support our teachers and our learners, and then the other support systems around them in a way that extends some grace and mercy, of course, but that also really looks at what we're doing now. One of my struggles, and I think it's shared across the state, is this incongruency between, or this unknown is, are we working this hard and are we moving in this direction as an interim fix? Or are we really framing our mindset to be able to say, let's make this the ideal? Because we don't know when the situation will cease to be, so that it becomes a permanent option for our learners long term. And so I don't know if I really answered your question directly, but you struck a chord with me when you said, what is everyone doing? And I think everyone's trying their best to do what's right within their context. And I think it's so complex. There's different variables that are prompting people to make decisions. I do think one of the assumptions we made, if I could grandstand a little bit on this topic, because I feel really strongly about it, speaking as Shannon, not necessarily on behalf of our agency, is we took the concept of school, not necessarily learning, to Dr. Solo's point about the apple guy. Oh my gosh, Sir Isaac Newton, yeah, the gravity guy.
The apple guy.
Sorry, he didn't have to go into a building. And what I think we've done is we've tried to recreate the brick and mortar experience in a virtual in a virtual setting. And oh, what an opportunity to break out of the brick and mortar, not to take away from what is happening there, but to really not just keep being transactional in our education systems, but being transformational. And I'll stop there.
So maybe we need I have an image of, instead of the apple on the teacher's desk, it should be apples from the trees as life experiences through which students should learn. Shannon, we got to write an article.
That sounds like a great idea. Y'all need to write an article. We love creating that idea for y'all to do that article here. Shannon, one of the things I've heard here in North Carolina, and I'm just curious as to how it is in Texas, is there's been a talk, and Nancy, you may have some thoughts on this as well, about reducing the classroom sizes because we want to keep the kids a little bit more distant and everything, and of course also requiring the teachers and the students to wear masks. So I'm just wondering, from the Texas standpoint, is that something that y'all are looking at, shortening or making the classes a little bit smaller, and also, of course, requiring the everybody on staff, even the janitors and everybody else, to wear a mask if they go into in-school learning and everything. So I was wondering how y'all are doing with that in Texas.
Well, we did thankfully receive allocation to be able to distribute PPE. I never remember what that acronym is, but the masks and protective personal equipment to our schools. And so that was one of our first efforts in terms of protecting our students and staff. Also, we do have capacity limitations in our buildings. You remember that high school sweetheart I mentioned earlier? He's a teacher. And so right now, he informs a lot of my thinking, because when he comes home, he talks about the challenges of teaching into a webcam, if you will. He's a shop teacher, teaches construction systems, and he also has students that are there in the class. So there are a lot of protocols that the state has instituted. I haven't memorized them all. Be thankful, or I'd recite them all for you here. But there's a lot of sanitizing that has to happen, and distancing, just like you see all over social media, with tape on the floors and desks set apart and cones on the playgrounds, keeping children distance from other children for their own safety. So we have lots of that in place. In fact, I'd mention, if you Google Texas Education Agency COVID specifically, you'll see all of those recommendations there as well.
Sounds like y'all are doing a lot of great work in that state and everything. As I was telling Nancy, one of the things we do here is we've got the trivia guests. So I've got to give some more clues to our folks that are watching. Mary was giving me a hard time for the clues last time for the one person. I don't know if these are going to be any better, so we'll see whether they can go with these or not. But the quote is, if you want to lift yourself up, lift up someone else. Excellence is to do a common thing in an uncommon way, and you can't hold a man down without staying down with him. So those are all quotes from this particular person that is a well-known person around the world. So that's some of the quotes that they are known for and all of that. And Mary's giving me that look like I still have no clue what the heck you're talking about. So until not getting any ideas as to who the person may be or anything along that line. So, and maybe this will make it a little bit clearer and everything. But one of the other clues is there is a certain class of race problem solvers who don't want the patient to get well, because as long as the disease holds out, they have not only an easy means of making a living. So that's definitely one of the quotes as well. So definitely, like I said, they are an educator. So hopefully y'all will think about the educators of the world. And then the last clue is success waits patiently for anyone who has the determination and strength to seize it. So that's the clue of that particular person. The other person, who is an Indian celebrity or from India originally, and I'll give you their clues later on. But definitely, Nancy, I also have to say that I am glad that you did me this great favor and everything, because we were talking about education. We were talking about all the things that go on in education. And I was so glad to see these amazing women that came on board in the conversation and were joining us in the conversation. So I know Ankin made a comment about that, but I was hoping that we would get at least one more male into the picture. So I was glad that Roland got to come into the dinner party as well. So Roland, one of the questions that I had asked the ladies, and I will also throw it to you, is what got you involved in education? Because I was talking to one of our other guests, Shanae, about how there is oftentimes not enough of the African-American males that are in the education field. So I would love to know what brought you into the world of education.
Well, actually, I initially avoided it like the plague, because I'm from a family of educators. Going back to my grandmother was one of the first African-American administrators in Caddo Parish, Shreveport, Louisiana. And then both my mother and father were principals. And so along with aunts and uncles, and so I avoided it like the plague, but ended up in there because it seemed that no matter what I did, I ended up teaching people how to do things. I spent a little bit of time as a professional audio engineer, but also worked for a major retail chain and handled all of the ultra high-end equipment because it required training. So I was always teaching people how to do things there. So eventually I just gave in, went back to college, finished up, got my master's, and I started teaching special education in Shreveport, Louisiana, in a middle school, which was was an interesting challenge. Nothing scares me anymore. Moved to Texas, ended up working for a statewide charter operation, and was dared into becoming their instructional technologist. I was an assistant principal at a campus, and a friend who worked in the central office asked me if I was going to take the position. And I said I was thinking about it. And basically her reply was, well, if you don't take it, they're going to give it to somebody else that's going to tell you what to do. So I took it. And from that point, moved from there to working for Dallas ISD, and became their director of educational technology, focusing a lot on building their computer science and robotics program. We were able to extend that. We took it out of high school and actually moved it into middle school and elementary school, because my rationale was, how do you expect students to jump into a computer science class in an urban district if they've never encountered any of that information? It'd be like asking a kid to, never having taken math, let's do calculus at 9th grade, right? That's not going to happen. They're not going to pick that class. So we decided to build a path. Went from being the education technology director to the deputy chief technology officer, and then I'm with the education agency. So I've been trying to build the scope of my effect as I move along the way. So that's my history there. So.
Appreciate it. That's a great history, and definitely some things that need to be learned about you and all. I want to come back to Mary and Flo and everything, because both of you are involved to some degree in the creative elements as well. So I wanted to, if you could talk to us about the importance of creativity in teaching, because I've always been a big fan of including creativity in the way we create teaching atmospheres and things of that nature. So I'll start with you, Mary, because like I said, I know that you're with that Playhouse, and I was actually watching a special that was being done about one of the rock musicians that's going around and using rock music to talk about education and to get folks engaged. It was actually Steve Van Zandt, and definitely there are a number of others that are doing that as well. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on using the arts as a means to teach our community and all.
So arts integration it's a really important topic to be discussing right now in this moment of remote learning, or hybrid situations where students are coming in part of the time and spending the rest of their week at home, however that looks. But arts integration really does make a difference. I've been involved, as I shared earlier, around theater arts integration, and giving students the opportunity, just to take an example of puppetry, for instance, and having students learn the ideas of puppetry and what entails in making a puppet. And I learned, you'd be surprised. When you think of a puppet, you probably think of a fancy marionette, or something that's got all of the features of a fancy puppet. But in fact, what you need is a face and eyes, a mouth and a name. And that's it. So folding up a piece of paper and putting eyes in a mouth makes a puppet, right? And the amazing thing is that a puppet, sometimes we're finding out over remote learning, can say things that I might not be able to say myself. A puppet might be able to, assume an effect or share an emotion or an expression through my piece of paper with eyes and nose and mouth and a name that I'm not necessarily comfortable doing. So we've been taking steps in terms of using theater arts techniques, such as puppetry, such as tableaus, or having students embody the personality of a character that they might be reading about, to help scaffold their ability to, deeply analyze a text or create a role or an experience that they might not necessarily feel comfortable doing in a different way or absent that modality. So it's actually been very powerful. Roland, you'd mentioned your experience as a middle school teacher. Before you joined, we were all talking about what an amazing opportunity that is. One thing I will add around that is being in this space of puberty and change that's within the middle school. That's an ideal time really to introduce theater arts, to introduce the way that dramatic effects might be done to empower and give voice in ways that a student might not necessarily feel comfortable in his or her or their own skin.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you on that and everything. Roland, do you have any thoughts about using the arts as a form of education? Of course, I'm also a big fan of the STEAM program. So not definitely A being the arts part, but definitely the technology and the other elements that are existing within STEAM. So I'd love to hear your reflections on STEAM and whether it's being used enough in our national educational landscape.
So actually, you can kind of build a link there. So when you're talking about the arts, I was a musician, right? And so if you're talking about music, what are you talking about? Sequencing, learning how to recognize relationships, learning how to even planning behavior, right? Those are all things involved in playing a piece of music, right? When you start talking about STEAM, now the interesting thing about STEAM is there are two levels to approach that from. There is what I call technology as a tool and technology as content. Technology as content is very different in that the idea is to engage the student in thinking behaviors that lead to being able to use technology creatively. So sequencing, again, when you start talking about robotics, one of the reasons why we inserted it into middle school is because that was a place that we saw we could start to build those types of skills, as well as, and this is very important, I believe, when you're talking about urban students, this idea of iteration. Right? This idea of getting it wrong until you get it right, rather than seeing getting it wrong as failure. So one of the big pushes, or one of my big undercover ideas behind that, especially after talking to some of our math specialists in the district at the time, was to start to build that idea that students would approach a problem not from the standpoint of, oh, I have to get the correct A, B, or C or D answer the first time, or else I just don't know it. But start to approach it from the standpoint of, okay, I'm entering something that I don't know what the result will be, but I know that I can engage with it again and again until I resolve it in the way it needs to be resolved. Computer science or computational thinking and robotics are a good way to get that going, right? Because it's not something that's tested, so it's kind of low risk for students and teachers, and B, because it's kind of this non-mainstream, I guess, content. Students, it doesn't transfer into, oh, I'm horrible at math or I'm horrible at language arts or whatever. But you do have resiliency that can transfer over into that area, because if a student decides that I can build a robot, 5 different times to make it better, and that's another point of not only do I have it working, but what do I do to optimize it? What do I do to make it better? What do I do to take it to the next level? And watching a bunch of students compete about that will change your mind about urban students really quickly. So that can transfer into, well, I can do this in math. I can do this in language arts. Yeah, I wrote that essay. It wasn't great the first time, but I can improve it, just like I improved the robot or the application. So that's the idea, I think, the idea you want to build behind STEAM. You're not going to build a whole class of computer scientists, although that's not a horrible outcome, right? But you may build a whole class of very resilient, very, the way we used to talk about it in the department is building students that run at problems. You know, they don't engage them, they run at them. So, and there's a quote I remember from, I think, and you may or may not know of this person. His name is Reuben Feuerstein. He's dead now. He said, restoring the joy of solving, one of the things he wanted to do with what he was doing was restoring the joy of solving truly difficult problems. So, okay, so that was my little rant on STEAM and
that was a great rant, and STEAM is a very important thing. So definitely, I'm a big fan of the STEAM programs, and I'm also, like I said before, a big fan of education. I'm always glad to see other folks that even go back into education late in life. Like I just saw recently that one of our major NBA stars is actually going back to college, and he decided to go to an HBCU, that being Chris Paul, who is now going to be attending Winston-Salem State University here in Durham, North Carolina. So it's actually in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, but he's going to be attending that university and is actually understanding the importance of education. So I do see that a number of our folks, even some of the celebrities that might have bypassed education in order to get their celebrity status, are now seeing the importance of going back to school and are going back into school on different levels. That's one that I heard about recently when I saw that Chris Paul was going back to Winston-Salem State University. So that was really good to see that he was using that tool. And it seems to me that he was trying to encourage others to understand the importance of education, because he was talking about the reason he wanted to go was because he knew that there were things that he hadn't learned, even being an NBA star. So I'd love to hear some of y'all reflect on some of these athletes and some of these other celebrities that are decided to go back to school in these late parts of life. Because we've seen a number of folks that are even going back into new careers because of what's going on with COVID. So anybody that wants to take that question, I'd love to hear y'all reflect on some of our celebrities and other folks that are deciding to go back into the school environment. Flo, you're muted, so.
Wouldn't it be nice as athletes come into the field of education, salaries start going up?
I don't think we're going to get to the athlete level salaries, although close to there would probably encourage a lot of people who are a lot of teachers who are really working hard right now. But yeah, that would be interesting. That would be very interesting.
That would be great. But, you know, one of the things that was recently said is, I believe it was Chandra Rhimes that said that she had a new understanding for the pain of teachers because of remote learning, she had to teach her own kids. And so she actually said, I forget the exact quote, but she understood that they deserved a lot more than they are actually getting in terms of pay, because as some of the people have alluded to on this show, parents are now having to become teachers. So as they're having to become teachers, a lot of them are understanding the pains that y'all go through on a daily basis. Like I said, I have either unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your point of view, not had to deal with having children and not having to deal with the whole school environment. But I do have my 2 nephews, and I do have some kids that I mentor and help along. So actually, that's another topic that I'd love to hear y'all talk about, is the importance of mentors, either in your own career or just in life in general. So I think I'll defer to you, Flo, first, because I know that you definitely sounds like you've got some great mentors in your mom and others. But definitely, if you could talk about the importance of mentorship, whatever the nature of that mentoring is.
Thank you, Mark, because I am a true supporter, believer in the value of mentorship. And right now I am working with the interns in the OT, the New York State OT Association, on developing a student internship program, mentorship. So let me tell you about that, and then I'll tell you about my mentor. But the menteeship program, one of the areas that we have identified as is across the state, is the low percentage of minority students entering the field of occupational therapy. And so we did some surveying. Why? And one of the reasons is a lack of awareness of the profession of occupational therapy, intimidation of the science courses that are involved, not having a role model. And so a mentorship program that my 10 interns, graduate programs in occupational therapy are doing is to reach out to middle school and high school students and provide mentorship as they go through school on what courses, what get them to be motivated, share with them observations, even if via video or YouTube. We're even developing a mascot right now who speaks the language of the middle schooler to say, look, try this out. This is what OTs do. So I'm very, very excited about that project. My mentor was, I like to say, put Humpty Dumpty together again. She was the director of the occupational therapy program at NYU, my ultimate alma mater. I knew from the time I was 13 that I wanted to be an occupational therapist. It had all of the elements: problem solving, creativity, interpersonal. I didn't know that at 13 that those were the words, but it felt right to me. I was not a good student. I was not a good student in sciences. I didn't understand why I had to take anatomy and know how the human body worked. But then I realized why, because we're working with the human body as OTs. And I went away to school. I grew up in New York City. And I had a jolly good time when I got to the University of Buffalo. And the year was...
How good a time was it?
Oh, yes. And the year was 1964, 65.
Say no more.
And I was a bit of a rebellious student. Rebellious in the fact that I questioned a great deal the inquisitive nature, which is why I am so supportive of self-directed, learner-active classrooms. And I questioned, among other things, why did occupational therapists have to wear white uniforms? It was intimidating. It was the height of the Vietnam War. I did not endear myself to one of my professors. And I ultimately failed her course because I asked too many questions. And I failed her course because of the questions I asked. And then I took it again. And I failed it again. Same teacher. The only course I needed to complete my degree at the University of Buffalo. I ended up transfer. I was told that I would not, he gets upset with this story. No, I was told that, excuse me.
The dog does not want the story to end. So we'll find the story that ends later on. It was just like a suspense ending. So we'll find the suspense ending. Okay, you're back. So now we're going to hear the end of the story.
Break the dog biscuits to keep him quiet. So when I failed it for the second time, I was informed by the chair of that program that I did not meet the educational standards to become an occupational therapist. I was devastated, to say the least. I went on a 2-day binge, and then my roommate said, enough, get up and go get your degree. This is what you've wanted your whole life. Enter NYU. The most grueling interview I have ever to this day been through. Why do you want to be an occupational therapist? What do you bring to this profession? What are you willing to give? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? I I just celebrated my 50th year as being an occupational therapist. Frida Balin at NYU, I know she's resting in glorious activity somewhere in the heavens, taught me the most important lesson of all: go for your strengths. We now call it the strength-based approach to either education or therapy, but what a mentor. And I'm going to add that years later, I became very involved in my professional association. I was the chair of an occupational therapy assistant education academic program. And I was on the accreditation standards committee, helping to rewrite to meet modern day the standards for occupational therapy education. They're rewritten about every 7 to 10 years. And then I was honored as a fellow of the American Occupational Therapy Association. My award, which I look at periodically, says for excellence in educational standards. So that mentorship, when she put me back together, enabled me to pay it forward as an educator and to encourage students along the way, to bring the best in to go again for their strengths and to have them work from a strength base to achieve their goals. So that's my mentor story and the importance of creativity as well. And
definitely. Great story and an amazing way that it was connected and everything. And that's, like I said, I'm a definite big fan of mentors. We still got about another 25 minutes to go. And I did promise the folks that are watching that I would give them another clue about our other mystery guest that will come up at the end. But this one is the person that is from India. Her handbag always contains a tube of hand cream, sunglasses, 2 brands of perfume, her wallet, and a bottle of Tabasco hot sauce. So don't know, that seems to be a very much of a survival kind of method and everything. And she also sports a tattoo on her right wrist that reads "Daddy's Little Girl" in her late father's handwriting. So she's definitely somebody that is considered Daddy's little girl and all of that. So definitely, and her favorite movies are these movies, which are, of course, some classic movies, and that is, of course, things like Jerry Maguire, Breakfast at Tiffany's, and a number of others, including When Love Calls. So those are some of this particular person's favorite movies. And while shooting the song, Do Me a Favor, Let's Play Holy, in the movie, The Race Against Time, she stepped on a live wire and received a shock. So she was hospitalized for a day after that. So definitely, as folks are watching, maybe they can figure out who that guest is. That'll be apparent at the end of the show, because we do reveal the mystery guest at the end of the show. But like I told other folks that are even in the show that are having this conversation can also guess. So I've given y'all a couple of clues, including the educator as well as the person from India. So before we get to our next mentor story, which I'd love to hear from Shannon, do y'all have any ideas as to who our mystery guest may be before I reveal them? So, like I said, we've got a few minutes before those mystery guests are revealed. And speaking of folks that are in education, this particular person also, when completing 10th grade in the Boston, Massachusetts area, thought that they wanted to be a software engineer or a criminal psychologist. So, anybody got any guesses? So folks are still shaking their heads, looking at me like, nope, no clue, no idea. So now I will turn it over to Shannon and see who Shannon's mentor is. And then I've got another quick question as well. But I'd love to hear your story of your mentor, Shannon.
You bet. I would love to share my story of my mentor. His name, may he rest in peace, is Ramon Magallanes. And most of my career was in the bilingual education space, and he was our director of bilingual education. And I remember when I was first hired, low man on the totem pole, if you will, and he called me into his office, and gave me a powerful message that has served me well, I think, my entire life. And I'll just tell you what he told me. And he said, Shannon, we fly like a flock of birds, and we have a formation. We like our formation. We're in sync. We stay calibrated. Coherence is important. Clarity of direction. He went on and on. And he said, but I'll tell you this. You're our new little bird, and you're going to join the flock. And if you decide you want to take another path and leave the flock in a different direction, you do that. You just go and you see what there is to be seen, and you come back to the flock and you tell us. And what may happen is it may be terribly wrong that we take that direction, and you may have stumbled and fall and fail. But what I want you to know is when you come back to tell us about it, then we're going to fold you back into the flock. He said, but listen to me now. This is even more important. When you go out from the flock in that adventure of yours to find a better way, a better path, you have the power to change the trajectory of our flock. And so don't ever be afraid to fail. Don't ever be afraid to take a risk. Do it. And so he really instilled in me this power of, running towards the problem, as Roland said, seeking to innovate, not for the sake of change alone, but to be in this continuous improvement mindset, and that we are held accountable for bringing people along to what our best place can be. And that would be
mentor, it sounds like. Roland, what about you? I'd love to hear about your mentor as well. I'm sure you've got a mentor in your life, so I'd love to hear about your mentor, Roland. So who is the mentor that inspired you?
So I'm going to do two things here. I'm going to answer that question, and then I'm going to give you what I'm going to call a remix answer. So I would have to say probably besides my father, Dr. James Huey. He was a superintendent in Dallas ISD, and actually we both worked for the charter school organization, and he was the kind of person who was always clear-eyed and practical, and would always challenge you to push boundaries, although he may not seem like the kind of guy who would do that. But one of the things that I mentioned earlier about expanding the range of my effect, he had this. We were having a conversation one time, myself and him and a group of friends who were all mentored by him. So we all still he's passed away, but we all still challenge each other with his sayings and things. As I was considering moving up in Dallas ISD, one of my friends said that I was moving further away from the classroom, and so Dr. Huey interrupted and said, "Anytime you have the opportunity to expand the range of your effect, how many people you can affect all at once, you need to take it." And because if you're a teacher, not to say that there's anything wrong with being a teacher, but you affect one classroom. If you're a principal, you affect a whole building. If you are able to make changes in a district, you affect a whole district. So, that kind of helped me to kind of see, okay, if I'm going to bring what I do into spaces where I can, help people see solutions maybe they don't. The larger scale that I could do that at, the better option that is, I guess you could say. So, and at the time that I took the position with TA, I also had an offer from another urban school district, and that's kind of what flipped the equation there. So decided I would see if I could attack the state of Texas. Now the remix. So on mentorship. So if you take mentorship and STEAM and virtual education, right? So for a brief moment in between TEA and Dallas, I consulted with a small edtech startup that was trying to bring virtual mentorship in the STEAM area into a couple of school districts, because of the one of the ideas that always kind of bothered me about STEAM education is what I call the last 100 yards, right? How does that kid that your district spent, you spent money on STEAM programs and pulled them through, robotics and computer science classes, how do you turn them into a computer science graduate at the end of that road? And the reason why I say computer science graduate is because one of the things that kind of started me down that track was when I was an ed tech coordinator for the district. I was driving home listening to this NPR, listening to an NPR article on diversity in technology. And they were talking about Google's diversity report. And they had the person from Google's talent, their talent division. They were interviewing them, and the person said, well, yeah, actually, we thought we did pretty good last year because we were able to recruit half of the African-American computer science doctorate graduates into our organization. And so when the interviewer asked how many that was, he said, well, it's one, because there were only two that year. And so that's where I was like, okay, there's a problem with the pipeline. Okay, whatever we think, we need to move more underrepresented students into those fields some way. But after all the things I did in the district, I was like, okay, there's still not that piece that actually helps them make it through high school and be prepared to engage with what they need to engage with in college. And so we were working on this idea of how do you bring those students into technology workspaces virtually, so they actually interact with not only, not just having some big executive talk to them, but interact with members of teams in those workplaces, maybe engage with their work process as a member of the team and actually understand what do they need to know in order to be able to be part of that field. So we're working on a virtual mentorship app, or a remote mentorship app, I guess you could say, to actually engage students in that way, not just from the standpoint of, hey, we watch this lecture by this dude, but be involved in people actually working to solve problems in that organization so you can understand the process, how they think, how they approach things, and actually what they do for real. So there is my remix of the mentorship idea. So.
Appreciate that. Mary, if you would, I'd love to hear about your mentor as well. And as we're winding down and getting ready to wrap up everything, but I'd love to hear about your mentor. And then I've got an idea for Nancy that I'm going to toss to her as well and everything. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about your mentor.
So I've shared that I come from a family of educators. So I try to think that, that mentoring has been a part of my life all along. If I think just within a professional context, I would have to say Audrey Crum, who, when I was a vice principal, she was my principal. And we're in New Jersey. I should say importantly, we are a suburb of New York. So I was her vice principal in 2001. And one of the things that I think has left an indelible mark on me was, naturally we were impacted very, very much by September 11th. And one of our parents is an author, a children's author and a children's publisher. And she had the idea that we should involve the whole school in coming up with a children's book called Patriots for Peace, in which all the children would design a page and the kids would get involved in selecting which ones would go in the book and so on and so forth. And I really had the opportunity to learn from the example of courage, I think, and persistence, patient, graceful persistence that my mentor in this case had in ushering this through. Because you would imagine with losses in our school and our community, and with teachers, everyone kind of being up in the air, there was a lot of concern and almost resistance, really more worry, I would say, toward engaging in a full-scale school project at this moment. But I had the chance to see what leadership looks like in the front, in supporting a project that she knew in the long run would be, although uncomfortable in the moment, just in figuring it all out, tremendously enduring over time. So I had a chance to just watch her interact with parents, interact with teachers. I had a chance to be dragged along, and sometimes just saw what it meant to lead from your heart, to lead also from your head, and sometimes to be willing to take some resistance and to take some pushback and push through gracefully. So she did that for me when she was our principal. And I think I learned that well in that particular instance, simply because of 9/11 and our experience in living through that moment and through that year. But also in the way that I had a chance to see that and carry it through in my own life. During my own time, when I say she escaped, she retired. I succeeded her in that school as principal. And then as I've gone on into higher ed, into teacher education, trying to, understand and embody the idea that being a leader, takes a tremendous amount of strength, persistence, integrity, and a willingness to give and to share with your heart, even though that hurts sometimes. So she, provided me with that, and she was a tremendous mentor. I try to be a mentor to others in those ways.
Nancy, I'd love to hear your mentor as well. And actually, we can go a little bit over. My producers have told me that that's okay and everything. But I'd love to hear from your mentor. And also, I know that one of the things, this has been an engaging conversation. We've had it now almost a little bit around 3 hours and everything. So if you can bring us another panel like this of educators, I would love to extend that invitation to you again, because this has been a tremendous learning experience for me, as well as I'm sure our audience also. And on behalf of IBM.TV, I would love to have you come back. And I know that they're also looking for programming regularly as well. So I might need to have a conversation with you about doing a regular educational roundtable. So I would love to have that opportunity also offered to you as well. So I thought that this was a great conversation, and I will definitely talk to my producers about that and see if you're game, because I know that you're oftentimes busy doing other things. So you might have to find some co-host to, like maybe Shannon, to help you or shift the hosting and everything. So definitely that is something that I would like to put out there on the table, and they know that I'm always doing that, giving them ideas. And we don't have an education program right now, so I do think it is an important worldwide topic. So as we wrap up, and I will bring the mystery guests up and everything, I would love to hear from your mentors and also go around the table. I would love to hear y'all's advice for the world. So like if you got any words of wisdom that you want to share, that I also would like to hear from everybody. So Nancy, if you can give us your mentor and any words of wisdom that you want to share to the audience at large. Oh, you did it again, the mute button.
So I was hoping that you'd run out of time before you'd get to me, because this question always bothers me, because when people say, like, who were your mentors or who was your mentor, I always end up with, I had none. And that always bothered me. But what's happened is across the years, I have had lots of interactions that have shaped my path. And so, I mean, right from, you remember the story of the kindergarten teacher who got me, like right from there, her interaction with me shaped my life. My mother and father had so many interactions that shaped my life. I remember when I was in the computer world, the woman who hired me, you know, like, even though I find that I have these people who come in and out of my life kind of rather briefly, that they do something that shapes my world. My high school English teacher, you know, like I have all of these fabulous, I like to think of it as a tapestry of mentors throughout my life. And someone once said to me, the reason you don't have any mentors is because you're an entrepreneur. And entrepreneurs are out there paving the new way. So they don't really have people to look up to or to gain, you know, who can pave the way for you, because you're paving the way. But what you do is and I used the term earlier, where did I collect everybody here? You collect souls along the way that join you in your path. And I am grateful to every one of you who have joined me here today. Flo, you were kind of my co-host because you hung in there all 3 hours. And we still didn't get to talk about OT in a remote world, which I'm like, we got to talk about that. But I really appreciate all of you, and you all touch my life in different ways, and it's just a fabulous thing. So I'm glad that you've all come into my world. And I would love, as you can tell, I kind of like the hosting spot. So you know, I'm in, and I know a lot of people. But I will say that I think it comes back to, I'm going to bring back Isaac Newton and hashtag do something different. This is an opportunity to think outside the box. This is an opportunity to recreate. If Adele were here, she would say, because we're working on a book, and she would say, like, we don't want to call it recreating school education. We want to call it visioning education, because we're not anything. We're just starting from scratch. And I think that's such a great way to look at it. So do something different.
Sounds good. Mary, what would your words of advice be to our global audience, and what kind of words of encouragement would you leave them with as well?
Well, I would say, when I think about education, put caring and integrity on the front burner in everything that you do.
Definitely. What about you, Flo? What words of encouragement would you give to our global audience? Like I said, we do have folks watching from India, from South Africa, and a number of other places on this great globe of ours. So what words of encouragement would you give to them as we're facing all that's going on in the world?
Oh, was that directed to
Flo? Yeah.
No, the other Flo.
Believe in the power of your dreams. You can do it.
Sounds like some great advice. What about you, Shan? Glad that you were able to join us from the great state of Texas, but what words of advice would you give as well?
Okay, I'm gonna talk fast with my Texas twang, because I was hoping we would ask this question. So is everybody ready? I believe learning is thinking. I believe thinking must move us to action. I believe actions must propel us towards possibilities, not paralysis. Most of all, I believe learning must develop our minds for the future with all of our futures in mind. So here's the point. Because there is a soul purpose for learning, we must attend to our learning souls, not because of personal yearnings, but rather more loftier goals. Learning invites the question of how you will connect to influence the future without any regrets. So that's my piece of advice. Thanks for asking that question. I had prepared for that.
Sounds like it. Roland, are you as prepared? Did you got some words of advice for the folks who are around the globe and everything? So I'd love to hear what your words of advice are to folks as we're facing the pandemic and facing a number of other issues that are going on in our society.
Okay. Since I'm batting cleanup, I'm going to be terribly practical. Wear a mask, socially distance, and sometimes the obstacle is the way.
Well, I definitely appreciate that. You are right. You're batting cleanup. I was going to put on some more of the clues, and then we will reveal at the end, which means I just got to do a couple of quick clues and everything, and then we will have our revealed mystery guest. But this clue is, when I became Miss World, I couldn't believe I had won it. I used to sleep with my crown because I was scared someone would steal it. In a minute, the world changed for me. So definitely we know that they were a beauty queen of some sort or another, and they were also friends with Meghan Markle. So a lot of folks know who Meghan Markle is, and they were friends with Meghan Markle. So definitely that is one of the clues of our person, is our international person. And the other one is I did not come from a film background. I haven't learned anything about films or filmmaking, but I have a thirst to know everything about my profession. So that is our person that is representing India and all of that. So definitely, like I say, I try to get somebody that is a global person. And I'll give one more clue, which is that they were listed #1 by UK magazine Eastern Eye, one of Asia's sexiest women, and that was back in 2008. So that's the clue about our international star and all of that. So does anybody on our panel, because like I said, I throw it out to the panel before revealing our folks, but does anybody on the panel have any idea who that mystery guest may be before I reveal them and then give you a few more clues and everything? So does anybody have any idea who our mystery guest might be? So if anybody's got any thoughts, let me know. I'll also check on the comments before revealing the first of the mystery guests. I know nobody's having any luck there as well. So definitely, does anybody have any ideas who the first mystery guest may be? Folks are looking at me all puzzled, like no idea who he's talking about. Well, our first mystery guest is none other than Miss Chopra. Priyanka Chopra would be our mystery guest in this category. So Priyanka Chopra would be the mystery guest that folks can be looking for and all of that. So that is our first mystery guest that folks may be aware of or try to figure out who that is. But that would be our first mystery guest. And then the other mystery guest that folks might also be interested in learning about is none other than this person. And I'll give y'all a few more clues, and then I'll bring up our ambassador. Speaking of ambassadors and all of that, but this one, I think a lot of folks may be able to figure this one out, hopefully. But I'll bring up a couple of more clues of what they said. And one of the clues among their quotes is, "I will not permit any man to narrow and degrade my soul by making me hate him. Character, not circumstances, makes the man. I shall allow no man to belittle my soul by making me hate him." So that's one of the clues there, and that's some of the quotes that the next mystery guest also had as well. So they assumed the role of a major college as their administrator and as a major leader at the age of 25. So they were definitely involved at a major university way back in the 1800s at the age of 25. So then in 1872, they walked 500 miles to Hampton, where they were seen as an excellent student and received high grades. So I don't know if anybody's got any idea who that mystery guest may be also. So anybody that's watching got any ideas who my other mystery guest is? Oh, and they also advised President Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft. So that is our next clue and all of that. So
Shannon, you're shaking your head. You got it?
Mary did.
Do we have it? Anybody shaking their head? Anybody's got any idea?
Yes,
It was the walking to Hampton part that gave it away. Only one person did that, Mark.
And who is
Booker T. Washington.
well, correct. That is the mystery guest for today, other than Booker T. Washington. So you are right. That was our folks. So actually, we've not been having much luck with our audience, but definitely folks that have been watching within the show, because I did have somebody that got Mr. Kenyatta as well. So I did have somebody that got Mr. Kenyatta also. So definitely, I'm glad that that happened and all of that. So I'm going to.
Bye, Rowan.
Bye.
See you later, pal.
But definitely, we're about to see to thinking and helping me put together this amazing panel. It was a great show. Definitely want to talk to you afterwards and definitely enjoy a little bit of conversation with you afterwards about possibly some things that we can do in the future. But one of the things that I promised was that we would also bring up our ambassador. And I know that one of your guests was talking about the importance of hand washing and all of that. So one of our ambassadors does a whole conversation around that. So I want to bring up Ankit's daughter and have her talk about the importance of hand washing. So definitely about to do that very shortly. And I want folks to sit here and watch our ambassador. But this is Ankit's daughter and what she's got to say about hand washing, definitely washing our hands, and a number of other things that we are being encouraged to do.
कोरोना वायरस से कैसे बचेंगे? हैंड धोकर और ऐसे अपने खांसी जब आएगी तो ऐसे करेंगे अच्छू अच्छू और कोरोना वायरस को धन्यवाद हमारा म्यूजिक सुनने का.
And then we're going to get this plane on out of here, which is kind of our theme to get on out of here. And then I'll come back and talk to Nancy after I end the broadcast. But definitely a very enlightening conversation about education. And I look forward to having more of these kind of conversations on a regular basis. And as I say that, I will definitely talk to our producers and our directors here at IBM.TV. But I'm sure that a program around education would be much needed and much respected. So definitely I'm going to put on the plane, and then I'll definitely come back and talk to you very shortly about that idea.
All right.